Okay, back at it. Bering Sea planting report. For Alaska Place, Lee Cronin Fine presented model explorations for the stock, focused on converting the existing ADMB model to the stock synthesis platform. The authors ran 4 base models. They were trying to recreate the ADMB model as best they could within SS by sequentially updating the growth parameters, estimating mean recruitment and the recruitment deviations, fishing mortality, selectivity, and then finally estimating growth within the model. The team discussed that this is more of an alternative model than the base. But then the authors explored 2 actual alternative models with a number of improvements within SS. And they called it Model 24.0, includes updated survey age comps, using input sample size, using the bootstrap method for input sample sizes, and updating the survey length comps with input sample sizes using the number of hauls, adding age 1-2 to the fish, 1-2 aged fish in the comp data, estimating growth parameters, updating the length weight relationship, updating old age and growth, CVs. So that was all Model 24.0, which was a lot of data updates and some improvements. And then Model 24.1 is the same as 24.0, but they estimate the weighted age relationship internally. So that was it for the explorations. Next slide. And so the team discussed the need for additional diagnostics so they could consistently evaluate the models. So they noted that differences between the models were fairly minor. The team requested the author to please include control files that were used and to also include the retrospective analysis and any diagnostics, somewhat following what's outlined in the guidelines or assessment protocols. And then the team recommended that the author use the bootstrap method for input sample sizes following the Francis reweighting at their discretion in the future. And then for the final, the team recommended 2 models for November, and they ended with what the authors called the base 3, which was done within SS, but most closely mimicked the previous ADMB model, and then coming forward with Model 24.1, which was defined in the previous slide and allowed for consistency with the calculation of weighted age. And that was pretty much it for the Alaska Place. Do you want me to keep going or pause for these?
Yeah, maybe briefly pause for questions, or I'll interrupt you after each stock probably, but there's a question here from Andrew.
Hi, Kelly. Thanks. Just a quick question. So I'm wondering, was there any discussion about bringing forward the base model in ADMB for November with the updated data? My understanding is that the bridging models that were done in this preliminary analysis are all using the 2021 data, and maybe others can correct me, but I think, isn't it pretty common that if we're going to be switching programming like this, that we'd want to see the last accepted model, the results from that? Thanks.
Thank you, through the chair. Thank you, Dr. Monroe. So the question is, did the plan team discuss bringing forward the ADMB version with new data? And is that right? Okay.
That's correct.
I believe and I unfortunately I was listening to this actually last night, but I think Steve might jump in here. I believe the conversation went that the bridging was sufficient to go to the SS platform, and that the base 3 model was as closely mimicked the ADMB model as possible, and so that they could show a bunch of these diagnostics. But Steve, jump in if that was.
Yeah, through the chair. That we did discuss it, and we came to the conclusion that we were satisfied that this bridging exercise covered what we would in November, so there's no need for the author to have to go through the problem of redeveloping that ADM model again for November, that we were satisfied with the bridging exercise.
Yeah, thanks for that clarification. I do believe that there's at least one or a couple of precedents where we did that if there was a thorough bridging analysis that was reviewed, and we accepted that, if I remember correctly, was one of the switches to TMB that happened. So yeah, Sherry.
Yeah, especially I think the example was TMB, because I believe that Cole had brought forward and done this thorough bridging analysis when we actually even said in minutes, which I can't find right here, but I believe that we said that for other authors, we supported this type of change in October if they brought forward enough in bridging analysis. Now that was special for TMB, but I think we may have even said for well accepted or well documented programs. I think that was something, and if anybody else remembers, more clearly.
It looks like Jim had it in the chat that it was for northerns in the Gulf. RTMB. Maybe that was, I feel like it was Gulf Pollock as well.
Yeah, I know that they did that this year, but in a past year, my recollection is that we had given some guidance regarding that.
Yeah, he confirmed.
Okay, Allie may have some comments on that too.
Well, I just have maybe it's a hybrid of a comment and a question, but I think one of the points that Andrew might be getting at is that the base models for the bridging didn't use most of the updated data. There were only data through 2021. So base 1 through base 4 does not have the most recent data. And so I think that was part of one of my concerns about having that as the base model, right? There's definitely precedent with a complete bridging analysis, like I think was done here, for shifting software platforms without including the old platform as the base model. So there's certainly precedent for that, but I think there's also this other concern that the bridging analysis was completed with what is now outdated data. And so can that be a viable base model for November, I think is the question.
Yeah, I mean, we can pick that up in the discussions again, but maybe as a question to the plan team right now, from the plan team perspective, it sounds like you felt confident that the bridging analysis was done, that the new model was, or the new platform mimicked the old model close enough without any concerns. Is that correct?
That's correct, and we did note that there was almost no difference in those base models, the 4 that he showed.
Okay, thanks. I think, go ahead.
Okay, all the questions are good for Alaska Place?
Yes, I think we're good on Alaska Place.
Back one? Okay. So Carrie McGillard presented model explorations for Northern Roxol, also focused on models addressing plan team and SSC comments. The last full assessment had 2 models that were presented in an appendix that were used for a risk table adjustment to ABC. So the models explored for this assessment have the 2 minor modifications from those 2022 models. And then model 24.1 has Francis data weighting combined with the bootstrap method for estimating input sample sizes. That's the AFSC-ISS R package. And then model 24.2 builds off 24.1 by estimating female natural mortality, and male natural mortality is already estimated in the model. So these 2 new models resulted in much improved fits to the survey biomass index in recent years, and estimates of catchability also better reflected the previous research on herding for Northern Roxol. Next slide. So the team discussed the pre-1979 fishery selectivity, and that it seemed sort of unreasonable, but that was likely due to the lack of data or aging procedures that may have changed over time. There's some bimodality in some parameters. That was also noted in the trace plots, but this was consistent across change. So that was indicating that parameters were exchangeable and that the model had converged. There was a question on whether environmental conditions had been incorporated into the model. And I believe some work had been done in the projection model for this stock. And it is a research priority for the next assessment. And then the team discussed use of fishery age data from special projects and how this data could be acceptable for possibly for use with conditional data, but probably not for fishery comp data. But they also noted that this was likely a decision to be made on a case-by-case scenario. And then the team recommended 2 models for November, bringing 18.3 forward, which is the base model with new data, and then 24.2, which is 18.3 plus the Francis data weighting and the bootstrap input sample size, and then method, and then also estimating female natural mortality. And that's all for Northern Rock Salt.
Thank you. I don't see any questions on Northern Rock Salt, so continue.
Okay, moving on to Greenland turbot. Megan Bryan presented model explorations for Greenland turbot and focused on data updates, some new methods, and looking at the model assumptions. The slope survey strata area sizes had been recently updated, and length distributions were corrected for that. It was pretty much a data update. And then they did have, they noted that this data update had little impact on the model results. And then there was a new linear approximation method for generating region-specific estimates in the AFSC longline survey that was recently developed to provide a more statistically sound continuous survey index. So they looked at that, and including that interpolation method. And then another exploration was the use of new bootstrapping approach for determining the input sample sizes for bottom trawl surveys. They also looked at a number of model assumptions, mostly evaluating the autocorrelation in recruitment, assuming no autocorrelation, or looking at a fixed value rather than estimating it. And then reviewing the selectivity time blocks. They did an extensive analysis looking at the center of gravity estimates, and then evaluating an analytical solution for estimating catchability. This is the float option in SS3. And then finally conducting a sensitivity to not including a variance adjustment on the length composition data. And that's all for the model explorations. And then the team discussed the early model start time and some of the assumptions about the spawner-recruit relationship, autocorrelation feature, and then the lack of Francis reweighting in the candidate models. There was a suggestion to consider a temperature covariate as an alternative to fixing the spawner-recruit relationship autocorrelation term. And then the team noted that the lack of the slope survey presents specific challenges for this assessment. It's really important to have that information, but we probably won't have a slope survey anymore. So it relies on the longline survey, and the team supports the author's future research priorities to update the maturity schedule and to explore the most appropriate model start year that they did run as a sensitivity and looked really promising. So the team recommended 3 models for November. Model 1 just updated the slope data so from the previous model. Model 19 is model 1 plus using that new method for the longline survey, the Q float in SS, and doing the input survey sample sizes, bootstrap method, and not having time blocks on the slope survey data. And then model 20 is model 19 plus fixing the autocorrelation and recruitment. And I believe those were the 3 moving forward.
Sounds like a question for For you on green and turbot from Andrew.
Yeah, thanks. Just it's about the model and modeling numbers. But just for clarification, at model M1, that is the last accepted model, correct?
I believe, and then they added this updated slope data, which is probably just considered a sort of a data update, like a correction. So it's just
Okay.
something that would be done.
All right, thanks. And then second, I noted that the author had recommended model M18 and M20, and what was the reason? I was just trying to understand the reasoning why the plan team's recommending M19 rather than M18. What was the rationale?
I need to look back and see what M18 was. Sorry, I don't have them all in my head. I wonder if Jim's on. Did you happen to know what M18 is? Sorry, I'm looking it up right now.
Yeah, I don't see Jim. At least he's not promoted here.
Not promoted. I can.
Ellie may have some insights.
Okay,
Yeah,
go for it.
I think the difference is that M18 is based on M17, which does have the slope time blocks. So I think that's the difference.
Oh, M18 also has the slope time blocks. That's probably what it is. They had some long discussion about, but there's a lot of justification for taking out the slope time blocks in the document. I remember that. So possibly that's why, and just maybe simplifying this model, because I think when they started talking about the changing the start year, that can have a lot of impact on the model, and so some of these changes, maybe aren't as necessary. So perhaps they were going with more of a simplified view. That's my memory of the conversation.
Okay, I think we're good on that.
Okay.
And I think that's it on Greenland turbot. So go ahead.
Okay. Moving on to Pacific Ocean perch. Paul Spencer presented model explorations for POP and focused on responses to the CIE, SSC, and plan team recommendations. Some of the exploratory model runs included estimating stochastic initial age comps. That was model 24.1, and time varying survey selectivity, which was 24.3. Those both have very little impact on the fit. The authors also explored 24.2, which was increasing the penalty for dome shapeness in the bicubic spline for fishery selectivity. It went from 10 to 30, and that was to address the multimodal pattern in those recent years in fishery selectivity. And they also changed the prior on the Aleutian Islands survey catchability. The CV changed from, I think, 0.45 to 1.5, which is more in line with field work estimates. And yep, that was the explorations. Next slide. And then the team discussed trawlable habitats in different regions, and that how that would impact survey selectivity and catchability. They also noted the difficulty in combining surveys where there was little overlap. The team also discussed the multimodal pattern in that recent fishery selectivity and possible reasons for such a pattern. And those could include changes in the fleet and performance, or restrictions due to stellar sea lions. And the team recommended exploring the size distribution of POP over time related to changes in the fishing fleet. And then they supported two models for November, 16.3, which was last year's accepted model, and then 24.2, which is 16.3 plus the increased penalty for dome shapeness on the fishery selectivity and the log normal prior on the survey catchability. And that's it for Pacific Ocean perch.
Thank you. I don't see any questions on Pacific Ocean perch, so go ahead.
Okay, this is our last model exploration for black spotted rough eye rockfish. Paul Spencer also presented this and focused on SSC plan team recommendations. There was, he worked on inclusion of the IPHC survey and did not recommend including that because FITS and diagnostics all degraded when they added this survey. And then did a comparison of size compositions between the survey and fishery data. And none of that indicated that indicated that larger fish were similar. He also noted that some summary stats could be useful for this comparison. And then, did a comparison of black spotted rough-eye to POP ratio in the Aleutian Islands survey. That suggested a decline in bycatch rate that was not due to increasing POP tows, but rather the smaller sizes of black spotted rough-eye in the survey. And they also had a discussion that numbers might be better in this for this comparison to support this. And then the team discussed borrowing selectivity from another survey. There wasn't really one that was similar enough. And also the IPHC survey set line uses different hooks. The team agreed with the author to not include the IPHC survey due to the lack of links comp data as well. And that selectivity was difficult to determine, and also the poor fit. The team recommended bringing forward the previously accepted model 20, for November. So this kind of puts this into the update assessment territory.
Okay.
Any questions on black spotted rough-eye?
Yeah, we have a question from Andrew.
Yeah, thanks. This is about sort of the two data explorations that were done, the comparison of size composition between the survey and fishery data, and then the comparison of the black spotted rough-eye to POP ratio. It looked like, I had to do some digging, but it looked like both of them were recommendations from the plan team from November 2022. And I guess I understood why they were looking at the size comparison of the size composition, but I wasn't exactly clear why they wanted to look at the ratio to POP. And I guess my main question is since this was a plan team request, just seems like this satisfied that request and the plan team were happy with the results and no further analyses or anything to do with this is needed. Thanks.
Through the chair, yes, that was my impression of the conversation as well. I think they were actually trying to figure out who requested that. So from what I gather, they were happy with what Paul had done for that comparison request, and I didn't think anything further was required. I think maybe they just had a suggestion to use numbers instead of biomass for that. But it didn't seem like it rose to the level of needing to show it in November. From what I remember, there wasn't a recommendation on it.
Thank you. I think we're good on questions for that start. Okay,
so quickly we're going to go through the harvest projections. As Pan and Sarah mentioned in the beginning, these are newly done in September instead of November. For the Bering Sea, Aleutian Islands, we had 3 stocks that were evaluated. I just named the stock and then the lead author in this slide. We had northern rockfish, had a high catch in 23. That was expected to be smaller in 24. The next full assessment is in 25. Alaska skate, which is part of a complex done by Cindy Trebuzio. The catch decreased in 24 for both Alaska skate and other skates, and the next full assessment is in 25. And then I did arrowtooth flounder. The Bering Sea catch was the lowest in the time series. Aleutian Islands was low, but it did increase from last year. And the next full assessment for this one is in 26. And then we did have some discussion.
Before you go into the discussion, there's a question from Chris Sidden.
Hey, Kalei. So just a question here on some of these bullets. Can you interpret for me what high catch in 2023 means? Is that a good thing or is it a bad thing? Should that be some concern or no concern? How do I interpret that? And similarly for the others, if catch decreases for Alaska skate, how do I interpret that as the fleet can't catch that, or it's a decrease in abundance, or is there any metric there that's useful for us to think about harvest projections? Thanks.
Through the chair, thank you for the question, Dr. Sidden. I think I just put these in here to give you an idea of what folks were using for the extrapolation, because that's what the harvest projection is. I don't think none of the authors had any red flags for these stocks or put that into their documents. And so, yeah, this is just information on the data that was included in the projection model. That's all that they do for these harvest projections. There was no anticipation to do anything with it because I think the author would have flagged something if they were concerned with the catches.
I actually have a follow-up to that, and you may get to that in your plan team discussions on that. Well, yeah, you may, so I'll just hold off.
Okay. Is there another question from Dr. Surian?
No, go ahead. Oops, sorry. Sorry, yeah, Rob Surian. I thought, Rob, go ahead.
Yeah, I guess this is kind of a follow-up to Chris's, so I thought I'd just ask it now because I was rather than wait until later. Regarding this, the high versus low and whether there's concern or not. So when the table of specs that you gave us, it shows that like in for 2023, arrowtooth flounder was at 49% of TAC, and the catch was. Northern rockfish were at 95%, and skates were at 94%. So I guess at what point, I think similar to what Chris is asking, at what point is that a concern when you start getting close to TAC, especially for these assessments that are infrequent and with the projections and then also the lack of survey data?
Thank you, Dr. Surian, through the chair. So I think you're looking at our final slides where, yeah, the catch is close to the TAC, but I think also something to consider is perhaps the ABC as well, because TAC here in many of these stocks is set quite a bit below ABC. And this is some of the reasons why some of these stocks are on, at least for ones like arrowtooth flounder, on like a 4-year cycle, because there's less of a concern that they're going to go over the ABC or have any concerns there. And so I'm not sure if TAC is really the right metric to look at because it's set far below ABC in many cases.
Right. Okay. So then whether or not it's concerned is just because you're still like 50% of ABC.
Correct.
Yeah. Okay.
So that might be a better one to look at for understanding whether the author would put a flag up or not.
Yeah, and we may have a clarification here from regional office as well.
Yeah, Clay, this is Steve Whitney. Yeah, so on these species, the tax are set basically at the 2 million metric ton limit is all in play on this one. And the ABCs are much higher, but also these ones they contribute to the non-specified reserves, which is basically just a tax slush fund. So on these species in particular, when we get close to the TAC, we tend to bump them up. So this year, in the next few days, we'll bump up the skates tax. So these ones probably are not a concern, really.
And then we have a question from Curry.
Thanks, Dr. Shotwell. I saw in the plan team minutes there was some discussion of the reliability of harvest projections from August to the end of the year. And I think a recommendation to sort of explore how variable that might be on a species by species basis. Did I read that correctly? And was there any plan team discussion about, how do you identify if, the pace of catch for a particular species is so variable that you're unlikely to have a representative catch projection? Thanks.
Oh, sorry, you cut out there at the end. I did not catch that. Could you repeat that last part?
Well, just sort of thinking about projecting catch for a given year from August to the end of the year, it was noted that that might be variable among years for a species, but I'm trying to think through, or I guess the question is, did the plan team discuss what might be a troubling signal for a species? That is to say that kind of proportion of the TAC taken in August is extremely variable from year to year. How large would those jumps need to be before it was a concern?
Through the chair, thank you, Dr. Cunningham. I don't think we discussed how large it would have to be, but we did. I mean, if I go to if you just go one more slide down, that this is the discussion. That one. Thank you, Diana. So the discussion from the plan team, we did have some discussion about the current survey. Well, what you were asking is the catch. So this new catch is being pulled about a month earlier than it had been previously. And there was some discussion about sensitivity to that. And I believe all the authors at least looked at, how much that difference was. And if they were concerned, they would have said something in the assessment or in the document. I didn't have any concerns, and I did not read any in any of the others. As far as the sensitivity to the earlier catch dates, I think we supported potential for the center to evaluate that, but it hadn't been done. And we also talked about the lack of the current survey information because these have been completed prior to us getting those initial estimates. We got them in the plan team actually, and since they're coming in following us posting the documents, we thought to have a recommendation for those who are doing the harvest projections to at least coordinate with the survey folks so that the most recent survey, if there was one, could be presented. So you had the best scientific information available to make these decisions. If you saw a survey drop through the floor, perhaps that would be something you'd be concerned about. That might initiate, maybe an update or something or at least a discussion on what to do for November. That wasn't just a harvest projection. As far as the catch, though, these stocks are generally caught well below ABC, as Steve was mentioning. And it would be unlikely for the catch to initiate that kind of concern, but it could, and we were just leaving space for that.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks. Looks like we have a follow-up from Sherry.
Hey, Clay, just a question for clarification on that survey bullet again. So coordination with survey presentations to include harvest projection stocks. So do you mean, was that coordination with survey staff to get information before that, or is it in the presentation to bodies, whether that's the plan team or us? I'm just not quite following.
Yeah, through the chair. Thank you, Dr. Russell. That was to have I think I remember, to have the person who was providing the harvest projection update to the plan team, which I think was Melissa in this case, or Chris in the Gulf, to just coordinate with the folks that were providing from the survey staff that were providing the Bering Sea trawl survey or the Gulf survey presentation, so that the stocks that had harvest projections could be included in the presentation, because sometimes it's just some number of stocks that they present, and it didn't seem like there was much rhyme or reason to it, but we were suggesting that it would be, or recommending that it would be good to coordinate so that at least you saw the time series in that presentation.
That's great. Thank you.
Thanks. I think, do you, I'm not sure if we covered all those bullets, but there's no more questions on harvest projections right now.
Yeah, I think I did cover those bullets. Oh yeah, the team agreed with the authors OFL and ABC recommendations for the stocks. And then I think we just have a few more slides. The team recommended to approve the 25 specifications for use in informing the proposed rule in 25 and 26. That's these next two slides. And then the last slide is the team adopted the Bering Sea halibut discard mortality rates based on recommendations from the halibut DMR working group. And that, I believe, is the end of the Bering Sea Plan Team report. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much for the presentation. Any other questions on either the discard mortality rate or the proposed specs or anything else from earlier? Not seeing any more further questions here. Thanks again for your presentations. I think you may be off the hook for now.
Thank you all.
And we will, that concludes the BSAI Plan Team report. So I'm just checking for, there were written comments on the BSAIA from the Freezer Longline Coalition. I do not see any signups for public testimony on BSAI, so we can go into our discussion on this. And again, there's three parts to it. And we'll start with the GADIT proposed models, I guess. And the leads on this are Dana, Curry, and Ian. And Dana, if you could kick us off.
Did you want me to do all three in a row or one at a time?
Good question. I mean, I guess I'd leave it up to your, however you have your notes organized. One at a time. Yeah, it seems a little cleaner. Might take a little longer, but also cleaner.
Okay, thanks. So Jimmy and Ellie gave us a document that provided an extensive review of some of the past analyses that we've requested, particularly focusing on the stock recruitment relationship for Pollock. So we want to thank him for his many years of responding about this topic for us. So basically this was spawned by the fact that, spawned, that's a good word for this. For the fact that we've been using the tier 3 ABC via the risk table for a number of years. So kind of looking at the viability of tier 1 going forward. So as I said, there's a persistent issue that we've looked at many times. And basically we saw from the analysis that the FMSY estimate is pretty unreliable, which is obviously key to setting on a reasonable ABC. He also showed that it kind of corresponds with F35, which maybe is a little comforting. Let's see. So as a result, the plan team review of this was sort of skeptical of the ability of a stock recruitment relationship to be used here, and they basically suggested a tier 3 designation. I think it's unusual that we would recommend that in October, but I appreciate the plan team's willingness to have us consider that. And I think what I would recommend is that we see some tier 1, 2, and 3 outputs next in November. It appears we probably won't see a new model. There's no recommendations that I could tell from the author of the plan team or me at this moment. So I think basically we'll just be looking at harvest control rules and tier estimates. I'm not going to repeat all the things that he did, but that we thought the use of M2 from Seattle is a good start of different ways to think about the ecosystem being put into that model, but produce pretty big effects on the stock recruitment relationship. I think we can recommend that historic CPUE data can remain in the model if they attend to the potential biases of those, but noted it wasn't likely that there wasn't a young fish that were harvested then. Look forward to any further analyses Jim would like to show us on more stable estimates or contributions to the ecosystem. There was some start of that in this document, but perhaps there's other things that we could see in December. And finally, I very much appreciate the web-based fancy version that was the assessment was this year. So thanks. That's it for me.
Yeah, thanks for that. Kurt, I think Curry is next.
Yeah, likewise, similar to Dana, I really appreciated the automated format of the presentation, exploring the sensitivity of the stock recruitment relationship to priors, thinking about temporal variation in that stock recruitment relationship, likely associated with environmental processes, to begin to fuel this discussion on whether or not we truly believe there's a reliable estimate of FMSY. I agree. It seems like we don't need to make that decision now, and I think I would concur with Dana that probably the most prudent pathway forward is to see recommendations under tier 1, 2, and 3 in December. Although, you know, there's a fairly compelling case to be made here, I think, in my mind, for how this may be less reliable than what we deem reliable given the wording in the FMP. You know, with that being said, I think it's probably good that we highlight some of the really positive signs for Pollock here. I think there was a 74% increase in the bottom trawl survey. So some pretty stunning signs of increasing population trajectory if those materialize over subsequent years. And I think that's it for me.
Okay, thanks, Ian.
I agree with the comments so far. I would only add one point, which is that in December 2023, we asked for the assessment to document the method used for determining selectivity to use in the forward projections. This assessment, as Jim showed in the presentation and in the document, this assessment is very sensitive to the choice of selectivity. And I think what we're hoping for here is not so much another review of how sensitive it is, but an actual objective rule so that we can kind of have an expectation of what method's going to be used to determine selectivity on a year-to-year basis in this assessment. So I think we could reiterate that, and that without having a new model, that could be something that's brought back for us later in the year. My only other comment was, in addition to the website, I wonder if we could get an audio version where Jim actually reads us the assessment so we could just listen to it on the plane up.
I think Maria showed us an example of turning a document into a podcast. So I'm sure we can get AI to read the document with a Jimmy and Ellie voice. Any other comments on Pollock? Whoops, not seeing any other comments. So for this, we'll just note that we appreciate the thorough exploration of sensitivity of the spawn-recruit relationship to the priors and the environmentally driven variability. We note the PT suggestion for or recommendation for a tier 3 designation. I mean, from the comments, I think there may be sort of general support for that, but we won't make that decision until December. And there were no new models proposed, and we asked for the author to bring forward the tier 1, tier 2, and tier 3 calculations, so we have that available. Note that we appreciate the web-based assessment version. And then we reiterate one of our previous recommendations regarding better documentation of the method used for selectivity in the projections. And that's all I have. So Dana, next stock you wish to cover?
How about Aleutian Islands PCOD? So we got a new document on Aleutian Islands Pacific Cod, proposed 5 models for consideration in November. These were a number of new tier 3 models in response to the SSC and a couple of tier 5 models. I think there was some really good progress made here and appreciated the thorough bridging analysis. And I think some improvements were made on the way to the 24.1 model that was one of the recommended models. Did have a few specific questions, some of them similar to the plan team. The change in likelihood when we go to a Richards growth curve, which is just one more shape parameter, is tremendously large. And so I think we would benefit to see some further exploration on how the likelihood changed so much from that and changing growth curves. And the plan team also noted that too. So I just want to support that. I didn't get to hear the entire plan team, but there were some slides in their presentation about the conditional age at length data, length at age data. And there was a bunch of things circled that looked really weird, but I couldn't find anything to explain it. So I might ask for more about that. So the teams endorsed bringing forward models 24.1, 24.0, and the Tier 5 models. And recommending an additional bridging model 24.1A. And this is kind of addressing that Richards curve big change. So one with the natural mortality block, but with von Bertalanffy. And I guess I just had a little comment on maybe one more model, even though we already got quite a few here. And that's related to appreciating the authors considering some environmental data in this assessment. But I think the current parameterization is somewhat a blunt tool that assumes that we have a mechanism identified for that increased M and that it's constant over time. I think if it was based on cod hatch success, it might be more appropriate to consider as a recruitment covariate rather than an M covariate. So I guess I'm suggesting maybe what 24.1B, which removes the block on M and uses the LVB as sort of the simplest case scenario, but utilizes some of the improvements that Ingrid brought forward on the way to 24.1. And with that, thank Ingrid for the extensive work.
Thanks, Dana. Curry.
Yeah, likewise, I want to thank the author. They've put in a tremendous amount of work over the past few years to try to move this assessment forward in a Tier 3 context, and a wide variety of explorations to that end to try to give it over this hurdle. And I think we need to highlight our appreciation. With respect to the choice of models, I hadn't considered the addition of a new one that is kind of somewhere in the mix, slightly simplified. I believe you said without the M time block and using the original von Bertalanffy growth. I think that seems reasonable as a request, as sort of an intermediate between both the status quo and the new models being proposed. So I'm in favor of that.
Thanks for that. Can you clarify then on your suggestion, Dana, to look at environmental effects in terms of recruitment or effects on recruitment rather than mortality? Is that part of this proposed model or one of the models?
I was just thinking that was something to explore in the future if environmental covariates were to be put in this model.
Okay, thanks for the clarification. And then Ian.
Yeah, I don't have much to add. I agree with everything that's been said so far. A couple of minor points. I raised this for the Bering Sea PCOT assessment last year. I have some concern over using a fixed M based on a prior, which is derived from maximum age, which comes from only recent data on a stock that was surely fished before that age was observed. I think that's going to lead us to biased high estimates of natural mortality in all cases, unless we got really lucky. And I guess I would like to see some more consideration of whether or not the true maximum age that you would use to derive an M prior should be slightly larger than the value that you actually observed in a short time series, particularly for cod, where I think we have some concern about the aging efficacy of cod, especially prior to 2007. The second comment I have is that I noted in two of the likelihood profiles presented in this assessment, there's an F ballpark penalty that's occurring, and that should never be present at the end of a model run. So I don't know what's going on there, but that should have been turned off, or at least not present at the time the model finished running. This is just a tool to speed convergence. It's not supposed to be there when you're done running. So I think this model still maybe needs a little bit of work. The other thing I noticed is that there's two tables, and I was just looking for the numbers. I think it's 2A5 and 2A6 that report catch, and the totals don't match in the two tables. And I don't know which one's being used in the assessment, but might be worth clarifying that at least next time we see this. Thanks. That's all I've got.
Thank you. Any other comments on Aleutian Island Pequot? Not seeing any, so we'll just note the 5 models that were considered here. We appreciate the improvements and explorations that were brought forward. Reiterate the concern over changes in the likelihood when adding just one parameter to fit the Richard growth that led to an unusually large change in likelihood. We support the recommendations of the CPT to bring forward models to 24.1, 24.0, and then the Tier 5 models, and maybe suggest a 24.1b Dana version without the M time block and the original LVB growth. We appreciate the exploration of environmental correlations, but note that perhaps that's better incorporated as an effect on recruitment. We have some concerns over using a fixed M that's based on very recent data for maximum age, which is slightly biased high. So the maximum age should really be based on, should be larger than the recent, maybe based on a longer time series and more complete data. We had some specific concerns over some presentation of the likelihood profiles and some discrepancies in tables that we'll note, and that's all I have. And next up, I think last is EBS Pequot.
Yeah, the SSC received a document on the Eastern Bering Sea Pacific cod assessment, introducing some alternative models with changes to length bin sizes, updated aging error matrices, and new aging bins bias estimates for pre-2007 data. There was also a pretty extensive conditional age of length data exploration that perhaps did not turn out as hoped. So that model was not recommended to come forward. The team discussed the increase in length bins, and we brought it up today, going from 1 to 5. They were hoping he could explore that a little further, and I agree with this. And I think the part that I would focus on is making sure that or trying to see if finer bin structure close to inflection points in things like selectivity and maturity is important to reference points. I'm sure at the edges that bin size doesn't matter as much. Already touched on the conditional age at length. So the teams endorsed presenting 2 models, 23.10D and 24.1. I thought I had that written down what those were exactly. Yeah. So the base model with updated data and an updated linear aging error for all years and updating aging bias. This was in response to the aging error matrix being with splines and kind of showing a strange pattern of way more aging error at older ages. So I think that's where that one came from. And then 24.1, which is with the 5 centimeter length bins, static survey selectivity, and updating the spline with new data. And of course, I naturally have a third model that I want to suggest. I'd like to see the 23.10D, which is the closest to the base, with static survey selectivity, linear aging, and also attempt to fit marginal fishery ages rather than conditional age at length. And I guess I appreciate hearing there's a postdoc working on that now, so maybe we won't see it, but I'll request it anyway. That's all I got for this one. Thanks.
Thanks. So that's one of the models that was in the mix, right? That CPT dropped, and you are saying bring it forward.
All right. It's kind of a slight variation in between the 2 they recommended. And unless I'm wrong, there was a lot of models. I might have missed the one I wanted in there.
Yeah, Kerry, go ahead.
Yeah, I guess the only, well, in addition to what you said, I think that I think we should, support the groundfish plan team's recommendations to explore using empirical weighted age and time varying length weight relationships. But with respect to the marginal fishery ages and whether or not that should be included as a model for, I guess, review in November and us in December, I sort of have the question of whether or not that's feasible over that time frame. I don't know if we can bring the author back in to discuss that.
Well, I think the way we've handled that sometimes is, as at the discretion of the author, we might recommend it, but we're not requesting it.
Yeah, and that's how I wrote it in the notes, but I didn't say it out loud.
Okay, good. Do you have anything to add?
No, that's fine with me if it's at the discretion of the author.
Ian?
Yeah, I would second that recommendation to explore fitting the fishery age data as marginal, but whether that happens this year or not, it's fine to leave that up to the author. I think we might further note that this stock in particular is a very strong candidate for consideration of re-aging a few years of historical fishery age data. I think just a few years of high quality fishery age data from sometime in the early time series might tell us a lot in this assessment. So I don't know that we can give recommendations to the FSC, but at least we could express our support for a consideration of prioritizing that in the overall mix of ages or aging activity.
Yeah, thanks. Actually, any other comments on PCOT, Eastern Bank Sea PCOT? I'm going to probably go, since we're going through stock by stock, I'm going to do sort of abbreviated summaries and only highlight the things that, since the summaries are fairly short for each stock, I'll just highlight a couple things that may differ from the plan team. So I think the main things here is that we generally support the plan team's recommendations. We do suggest at the author's discretion, I guess, adding an additional model that's a slight variation on one of the models. And is that actually one that explores fitting marginal fishery age data? Yeah. And then I think we can recommend that that the aging lab consider re-aging some historical fishery age data that could really help with the aging bias and the persistent aging issues with that stock. So that's it on the gathered stocks, and then I think we can go to, right? I'm not missing a gathered stock. So we can go to the proposed models for other stocks, and I have Andrew, Brad, and Ali, and I'll start with Andrew.
Great, thanks. Yeah, first I think our minutes should reflect thanking the authors for all the work that they did on their proposed models and the plan team's review of them. I'm probably going to keep this pretty brief because I don't have a lot to say, and not just want to make sure that's not because there's not important, but sorry, lost words here. But basically, I think we should accept all the recommendations just in general that the plan team had for the 5 stocks that have proposed models. That's Alaska Place, Northern Rock Sole, Greenland Turbot, Pacific Ocean Perch, and Black Spotted Rough-Eye. And I don't have any recommendations for any other models other than what the plan team had recommended. So I think we should accept those. The only exception, it would be the Alaska Place, where we're transitioning from a bespoke ADMB modeling platform to stock synthesis. The authors provided detailed bridging, good rationale for this transition, which makes sense, and I think we should be generally supportive of that. They provided 4 bridging models that the plan team reviewed, and felt that it was supporting this transition from this base model, and with base 3 being the model in stock synthesis that most replicated the ADMB version of it. I guess there's precedence for us. I had asked the question about bringing forward the base model in ADMB for November and press for review in December, and there's been precedence of not necessarily having to do that when we're transitioning platforms, and unless anyone has a differing opinion, I think that's acceptable. Just noting that the base 3 model was run with the data from 2021. So I think we'd expect to see that with the new updated data. And of course, appropriate model numbering. And I think that's about it. Thanks.
Okay, thanks, Brad. Anything to add?
Thanks. So I support Andrew's comments and recommendations across the board for these stocks. I thought that we saw a good exploration and good justification for the models that were recommended. One thing I wanted to highlight that I just picked up in the plan team minutes as it regards the Alaska Place is that beyond talking about this particular assessment, the plan team noted that they wanted to extend the use of the control files as a way to actually really look carefully at parameters estimated within and outside of the model as a basis for determining which metrics were appropriate to compare models as a practice they would like to extend to general approach when it comes to stock synthesis. And so I thought that was a good sign. One of the benefits to moving to these standardized platforms similar to GMAX is that it allows other assessment authors to pull in files, have a look, and get down into the weeds on some things that oftentimes we don't get a chance to look at. So I thought that was a really good sign. And I'm remembering back to when Chris Lunsford talked to us about stock prioritization. This team approach was one of the things that he brought up. And so it's cool to see it's starting to show up in these assessments. I think it's a really good sign.
Okay, thank you. And Ellie.
I agree with the comments made so far, and I don't have anything to add. Thank you.
Thank you for that efficient coverage of the other stocks here. So I will just note that we'll accept the recommendations and the models brought forward for these five stocks that we saw. We'll note that includes accepting the SS3 version of the Alaska Place model that was recommended by the author and the plan team and supported by a detailed bridging analysis. And then we'll just highlight and support a PT recommendation regarding the sharing of control files. And that's all we have on that. Dana?
Yeah, I hate to do it, but I think we need to have this discussion about the whole base model thing coming back a little bit, because I mean, we're kind of going away from all the years I can remember precedent that you always bring a base model with updated data because the new data might blow up your any model you came up with old data. It could totally fall and you've got nothing to come back to in December. I'm only bringing it up because it came up a few times during this cycle, so we might be talking about it again. So we can wait. But I'm just throwing it out there.
Yeah, so if I understand, the concern is that the bridging analysis was done with old data, but it was done, right? I mean, so is there a difference between if it was done a year earlier or if it's done this year in terms of our confidence in the new model matching the old model?
Yes. No, I think that there should always be a base model from the previous accepted model that updates the data, because we've been in multiple situations, not even too long ago, where the The model that we didn't have a model to go with because they just came with a new model that they had talked about and it didn't work because the new data was so different or whatever. So just saying we can move away from that concept, but we should do it knowing that that's changing things. I know we did it for TMB one time, but that's exception, not precedent.
No, I appreciate that point. And Curry, go ahead.
Yeah, I appreciate your point. I mean, I was reflecting back on our minutes from October 2023, right, which was the golf ball like ADMB to TMB transition, and I think our guidance was fairly clear that if the plan team was happy with the parallel implementation.
Curry, can you make sure to speak into the mic rather than
rather than looking at Dana. Yeah. If the plan team was happy with the parallel implementation in terms of consistency in estimates for spawning biomass recruitment and fishing mortality, as well as comparison of uncertainty estimates, then we would consider that the new base model. I'm comfortable with that. It sounds like others may not be.
Yeah, I mean, we can separate the broader discussion from this particular case here. I mean, Alaska Place may be generally lower concern for that kind of transition anyway. But I think, I mean, I guess I tend to agree with Dana's point that it maybe should be an exception rather than the rule. But we will probably evaluate it on a case-by-case basis. So if there's other comments on that, Jason?
Yeah, I think you just answered. I mean, I think you could do a case by case. I guess just thinking about testing software, if you've got apples to apples data, like you should be able to do that bridge and see that it works. At what point do you draw the line if you're adding new data and something that you couldn't think about happens? I guess that could happen with the new model anyways, but it should be, just because you don't use the current year, it should still line up for the testing, I would think.
Yeah, I mean, that was sort of my thought earlier in that, is there really a difference between whether it's done on, at some point you're going to accept the bridging, the new model, if it's been thoroughly tested, and it can always blow up the next year, whether, it was tested on old data or on this year's data. So I'm kind of wavering on this myself, but it seems like in this case we're okay with it.
Sure.
But so
Sure, we can go.
there's Andrew, go ahead.
Sorry, my mic was on. Yeah, I guess the one thing to note is that the author did run some proposed models that were did the bridging on the 2021 data, but then modeled 24.0 and 24.1, and 24.1 is what the plan team recommended moving forward with. Were all done in stock synthesis based off of these bridging models, but with updated data. So we already know that it runs with the new data. But what we're missing is what the model that is most similar to the base model with updated data. And I'm assuming that's what base model 3 would be. We just would see the results of that come November, December. So I'm comfortable with it.
Okay, other discussion on that point? Martin.
Yeah, I'm just a little confused at what you're proposing, Dana. You're proposing that we accept this, but say it's not really it could have been done a little better. We should have had the more recent data in the old assessment and then done the bridging. Is that wish it had happened that didn't?
I said this was a broader issue than place, and I was trying not to make it about this particular one. But I mean, forever, we've always had to bring in the last year accepted model with updated data in December. And so this is starting the trend of breaking that cycle. And it's okay if that's what we want to do. I just want to make sure we're explicit about it, because it was talked about a lot this year, and it'll accelerate as soon as somebody doesn't have to bring their old model back.
Yeah, Sherry, go ahead.
So, and I'm looking back, in our minutes last year, there were two different sections, and I really thought, it's not, the more times I read this, I guess I don't find that explicitness that you're saying is not there, but I thought that we said that for TMB, if they show the things that we had suggested and plan teams accepted it, that it could be the only model in December. I'm not arguing for one or the other, but I think that if we say something different, we should make really clear in our minutes that either we're changing or that this is it. And also, I think I wouldn't be surprised if part of the reason that it came up this year was because of that. Like I heard it in Goa, I heard it dropping it, but I went back to thinking that we had said that that was fine. And so I don't know. I think we just need to be clear because I had thought we were in a different place. Yeah, go ahead. Oh, sorry, Franz.
Yeah, go ahead. We can certainly always refer back to our previous comments on that to try to be consistent. Curry.
Yeah, I guess from my perspective, if you shift estimation platforms, but the structure of the model is the same and produces the same model estimates, I'm not as concerned that something's going to go awry in December. And that was sort of the basis, I think, for our comments in the Gulf Pollock case that were phrased as sort of general comments regarding transitions amongst estimation platforms. And that would be the case where in December you bring forward a base model that's parallel in structure to the previous one, but in the new estimation platform. So in this case, it would be an SS3.
Yeah, I guess that's a question. The distinction, is that really a new model or just the exact same model with there's always going to be some differences, right? But in my mind, there's a distinction between moving to a new platform, but was the same model structure versus actually changing the model structure. So I mean, I think I feel I'm comfortable with our previous comments on that, and we should probably look those up. But we can refer back to the previous recommendation that we had where we thought that was acceptable, or the cases where we thought it was acceptable, and the conditions under which it might be acceptable.
Sorry, acceptable to drop.
To, yeah, just bring forward the model with the new modeling platform only.
Yeah, I think the wording in here, I don't think we said it explicitly, so I don't know that we're going to be able to find it, but the sentence was, we recommend for any transition of parallel model structure, specifically from ADMB to TMB, the plan teams should minimally review. And I think that what we at the time had discussed was that they would do this review and possibly bring back that single model. So if we think we need, and you're saying that is what you mean. If not, we need to be explicit. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean that was my understanding from before, and kind of my understanding where we may have landed again, or maybe there's some disagreement. But if the plan team is confident with that switch, if the model platform changed and they feel was thoroughly evaluated, then we would accept that as the model going forward, as a platform going forward. So I mean, I think we're good on that then. I mean, I think we're clear on Alaska Place in this case anyway, and we'll maybe refer back to our old comments, even if they're not entirely clear. But I think yeah, mostly we have consensus that the plan team can maybe make that decision. All right. That brings us to, let's see where we at. Oops. Sorry, Brad, go ahead.
Sorry, Mr. Chair, you made the mistake of thanking us for the efficiency of our review. So I did have one other, I guess I didn't have any comments on any other stocks except for what I said about Alaska Place. And I thought we were going to touch on them specifically. So I do have a comment on black spotted rough eye, if it's all right. So this is regarding the comparison of the ratio of black spotted rough eye to POP. And I'm just thinking about what Todd Loomis would say if he was here giving public testimony, because if I recall correctly, the reason why we asked for this is there has been a long-term conversation with this assessment author about the concerns and the change of size composition in the fishery and in the survey, and that the fleet was taking action to actually move their fishing distributions from deeper to shallower water. In fact, there's research projects ongoing looking at this. And so even though the plan team didn't have recommendations for the continued use of this metric beyond perhaps considering using abundance instead of biomass, because this is not a directed fishery, these are bycaught fish in the POP and Atka mackerel fishery, this ratio is actually kind of important. One of the questions that was posed by the assessment author is whether or not the change in the size composition towards smaller fish was a function of the moving fleet, or if it was actually a change in the stock itself. And because all we see is what is manifest through avoidance of this stock, it's difficult. So, or it's difficult to interpret. So I actually think we should just request that this metric continue to be presented in the next assessment, and perhaps the author can do this with abundance as well. Keeping in mind that we've had extended discussions and the council's been involved in potentially invoking the spatial management policy, and lots of different things that have to do with the boundaries of the two, I don't know, they're not stock areas, I can't remember. It's like sub area ABCs, right? And so I anticipate this potentially coming forward again. And so it would be nice to have this presented, I think, each year, as long as and it doesn't seem like it's a heavy lift. So I would just add that to the black spotted rough eye comment.
Yeah, thanks for that addition. It certainly seems reasonable that we can ask for bringing that forward in the future, so we have that metric available, unless there's any disagreement on that. So I won't repeat all of our recommendations then, but we'll add that particular point to that. Okay, are we good on other proposed models? Okay, so the remaining items then are any comments on the survey, the harvest projections, proposed specs, and other topics, although we didn't really discuss any other topics. Yeah, sorry, Andrew is up first.
I guess I'll start with the acoustic surveys, and I guess just my only thing to say is the SSC appreciates the summary of the updates on the winter acoustic trawl survey of the Bogoslav Island area and the Eastern Bering Sea acoustic survey and acoustic vessel of opportunity index. We didn't have any discussion about, and no recommendations on that. Okay, the next thing would be harvest projections. There are three stocks that had harvest projections done. That was northern rockfish, arrowtooth flounder, and the skate complex. And I think our minutes should reflect that the SSC concurs with the plan team and author recommended ABC and OFLs for these stocks for the 2025 and 2026. And correct me if I'm messing this up, but then there's no reduction from max ABC for any of these stocks. And
I think that was a recommendation, right? Yeah, I think so.
I guess just sticking on the harvest projections, just there's some I think Carrie had brought this up about discussions that the plan team had about when the plan team gets the survey updates to make sure that whatever stocks are having the harvest projection, that the survey presentation contains updates on the stocks that are having harvest projections done. I think we agree with that. Overall, these harvests, just some general comments about the harvest projection documents too. I think they're nice and short and fairly consistent, but I guess just recommending to the extent practical, just trying to keep them as consistent as possible. I noticed that in a couple of them, we're given summaries of catch over biomass over time, but another one is exploitation rate, and just kind of having to switch gear as you're looking through these different ones, why one was exploitation rate time series and the others are catch over biomass estimates. And then, again, it's sort of, we talked a little bit about this, or there's discussion about like red flags and if there are any red flags that the authors saw that they would highlight them. But I think what would be useful would be a positive statement in these that there were no red flags, so that when we're reviewing them, that we can see pretty clearly that, hey, the authors of these projections don't see anything, everything's normal. I don't know if anyone has any other comments on harvest projections before we move on.
Yeah, sorry, just go ahead and we'll go through all the items.
Okay. And I think just trying to about the only other topic that came up was the plan team had discussed. They had requested that the AFSC provide a brief document in conjunction with their assessment guidelines on various model diagnostics for stock assessments, and that would help assist with understanding and interpretation of model diagnostics. And I think we should support that recommendation too. And other than that, halibut DMRs, I think that's the only other thing. And I think.
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah.
We have the halibut DMRs.
Yep. And I think our minutes should recommend accepting them as presented.
Okay. Do we have other items under that BSAI? Do you have any other points?
I don't. Thanks.
Then second on that was Rob, I think.
Yeah, thanks, Franz. I just have nothing substantive to add. As far as the acoustic surveys, I had a note to acknowledge there was a mention of the only 2 toes associated with that reduced Bogoslav survey, but given the monoculture of spawning pollock, it didn't seem to be an issue. And they still were able to complete a sufficient acoustic survey, and also given that so little of that ABC and TAC are actually taken from that stock. And then also just to highlight for the Bering Sea summer acoustic surveys, super promising, that very strong correlation between the acoustic trawl survey and the vessels of opportunity. I suspect we'll be discussing that more in the future, but I appreciate that. And then as far as the only other harvest projections was mostly, at least with my relatively narrow window on this, it seemed like this change worked fine for us, and having the current year catch information was helpful since it wasn't included in the models, but we were able to view it in the table format, and definitely agree with the plan team recommendations. And then I also had made a note similar to what Andrew had said, that it just, when there's no red flags or if there's a high or a low, or statements are made just to provide a backup, no red flags because, or not a backup, but a reason, please, that no red flags because of this, just support for their reason for those comments. And that's all I had.
Okay, thank you. Do we have any other comments on any of these items, harvest projections, proposed OFLs and ABCs, and other items? Allie?
Wearing my vice chair hat, we do need to officially, no, we did DMRs, but we do need to recommend approval of the preliminary proposed specifications from the BSAI groundfish planting.
Yeah, we need to be explicit about that in our minutes, that we approve the proposed recommended OFLs and ABCs for the BSAI groundfish. Our minutes will reflect that. And then Jason.
Yeah, I hate to bring this up, but if it doesn't come up now, it's going to come up during the GOA harvest projections. Just some thoughts on whether we need to be doing the harvest projections on 2-year cycle stocks versus 4-year. So I'm asking, should I wait till we get to the GOA or bring this up now?
I mean, I guess it's up to you. I mean, it's obviously on your radar. Maybe we can handle that under GOA and make general comments to all the plan teams. That works. Yeah. Other comments on these issues? Martin?
Yeah, didn't quite get through all of them, but I believe that the method that they used to extrapolate the catch to the end of the year was different in each of the projections. One, you used a 2-year period of, the previous 2 years to figure out the proportion that was left on, that hadn't been caught by the time that the data was pulled. And another one used a 3-year period. I think the third one, I'm still trying to figure out what exactly was done, but it looks like it was the last 5 years or something. So there's a little bit of bouncing around in those, how that approach is implemented. And I think we could at least get back to the plan team that there'd be some benefit if there isn't a reason to, if there isn't a compelling, what would be is there a standard way that can be done? So that's not a source of additional variance in how these assessments are treated. I think it'd be beneficial.
Yeah, and Sherry has a comment on that, and I'll note that we have commented on that in the past to try to strive for consistency across stocks. Go ahead.
So I don't remember in all my reading whether it was in the plan team reports or not, but in the plan team meeting, that was raised, that we had asked for consistency and any not absolute consistency. We had asked for any similarities, like you were talking about, if it's not critical. And the response that I heard, which I guess I'd like to make sure with the plan team coordinators whether or not I'm correct on this, but my recollection was that we were told that all the stocks are different and they're different specifically for a reason, and that no standardization could be done. And so if the SSC disagrees with that, I think that might be valuable to have in our report. But I just wanted to let you know that that comment was tracked from our minutes in the past, and that was the answer that I heard in plan team discussion.
Yeah, thanks for that. So unless there's specific concerns about what they did this year, we can certainly refer back to our previous comments that be nice to have as consistent an approach as possible.
Yeah, and I think, Andrew brought that up in his as well. So So yeah, I mean, I agree with you. We can put in as consistent as possible. And if for some reason there are specific ones that are so similar that you actually think could be combined, you can give examples if you have them. It's up to you.
Yeah, go ahead, Martin.
Yeah, I would just try to, I mean, we should respond back to them, but I guess what I would suggest is that we try to say, look, how about adopting a sort of standard approach, a 3-year period, whatever makes sense. And then if individual assessment authors believe that that approach doesn't work for their stock, then for sure they can do something different, but they would have to justify it. And I think that would sort of allow the flexibility, but at the same time, we don't want somebody to use 2 years and somebody to use 3 years just because it seemed to make the most sense to them at the time that they had to do it.
Okay, thanks for that. Other comments on BSAI stuff? Okay, not hearing any. I'll keep this very brief. We'll note our appreciation for the updates on the acoustic surveys and have some minor comments on that. With regard to the harvest specifications for northern rockfish, Arrowtooth flounder, and Alaska skate, the SSC supports the recommendations for the final OFLs and ABCs for 25-26 for these stocks. We will note that the methods for projecting catches differed among stocks and ask the authors and plan team to standardize these as much as possible, recognizing that there are some stock-specific differences that may warrant a different approach in individual cases. We support the recommendation from the plan team that survey updates to the plan teams include the stocks that are that have harvest projections. Then with regard to concerns over the short time series of catches or the early the need to make these projections of catches over a longer time period, I guess. It would be nice to include in the harvest projection a positive statement about the lack of any concerns or red flags, unless there are any, and then bring those forward and take appropriate action before November. With regard to the proposed specifications, the SSC approves, I guess, the proposed recommended OFLs and ABCs for the BSAI groundfish for 25-26, I guess. It says 24-25 in the table. And then finally, we support the proposed halibut DMRs, which haven't changed. And I believe that is it for BSAI. So let's see, it's 2:35 now. We should probably take a quick break before we go to the Goa and then strategize about the other items that we still have to cover today or tomorrow. So let's meet back at 2:45 and start on Goa plan team report. Thank you. Okay, if we could take our seats again so we can continue. Oops, sorry. I didn't see you there in deep in conversation. If you're still planning for this, then go ahead. Okay, thanks. I think we got the internet back, which is good. So hopefully people can hear us online. And we we're taking up the Gulf of Alaska Groundfish Plan Team report. Just
You need the room?
brief.
You need the room? I have to talk.
Is that voice coming from? No.
Is it Jim?
Okay. Just briefly for our process, we'll again split this up. We have Curry, Dana, and Fabio for Cod and Pollock proposed models, Sherry, Brad, and Jason for the other proposed models, and then Jason and Chris Sidden for the remainder, including the harvest projections and proposed specs. And then we'll go through all the topics, take a public testimony, and then do our discussion at the end. So with that, I'll turn it over to staff.
Through the chair, this is Sarah Cleaver, council staff. I'm the golf plan team coordinator. Dr. Stram already introduced your actions in front of you today, so I think we're just going to move ahead and see if we have Dr. Iannelli on the phone, which I know we do. Just depends how many people are with him. Jim, are you there?
Yeah, I'm here. I'm just trying to find a quiet place. It's hard to find. But yes, can you hear me okay?
Little weak, but we'll try to adjust that here. So go ahead and I'll interrupt if we can't hear you.
Okay. Yeah, thanks, Chair. Sorry for the background noise. I'll try to keep it brief. This should be fairly brief report. And stop me if you can't hear me or it's getting staticky or whatever. Next slide, please. So this is a summary slide of all the categorizations of the presentations we heard and whether or not they were recommendations and what type of analysis or presentation was involved. I'll be covering down through harvest projections, and then Sarah and Chris will take the rest. Next slide, please. So first was the Gulf Acoustic Trawl Survey. Red X's here showing what didn't cover this year, but really nice presentation by Mike Levine. There were some delays and whatnot, kind of normal practice, but they did complete a survey. Next slide. And here's just showing the time series of trends between the different regions, Shelikoff being the primary one. And yeah, just the Shumagins was covered this year, and it's kind of looked like about an average level on the upper left. Pavlov Bay was similar to the previous year they were able to do the survey. Chirikov was up some, and they seem to be mainly age 4. Next slide. And then that following this slide, we did a deep dive into the Gulf Pollock assessment. The authors did an extensive response to the CIE review that occurred in May this year and made 4 principal changes. Was there an issue? Can you hear me? I just heard something. Okay. I'm not hearing anything from you. Is everything okay?
It's glitchy. I'm not sure where the issue is. You're breaking up. I mean, sometimes we don't hear anything and then you come back. I don't know if it's on your end or if there's a.
Yeah. I'll try to sit more still. Yeah, so these are the models that we went through, and a lot of work done by Cole, and he was very diligent about updating all the diagnostics and including that. Next slide, please. This really does a good job of summarizing our discussions. And the previous assessments, by no fault of the previous authors, reported the input sample size, but failed to report on the final one that gets used. And it turns out those were really low values, and it was seemingly too low and needed to be rectified. And one way of doing that turned out to be with the Dirichlet multinomial, which we were happy to see put things more in line with kind of expectations. That was a major aspect of this assessment that changed, and the team appreciated that and just reminded people that you should always include the actual sample size that ends up being used in an assessment, as opposed to just saying we started with this and then we reweighted the sample sizes but didn't report them. So that was kind of the change there. Another big aspect, which has been shown before, is the new timing aspect of the mature. Lauren Rogers and co-authors finished a paper where they have a covariate that affects the availability of the acoustic trawl survey in the Shelikoff region, and that improved the fits significantly. And Cole indicated that the random walk penalty was still in the model, but it was no longer needed. So we requested that be dropped, and then recommended that his model 23D, and then of course the base be brought forward for November. And then we talked a bit about this figure on the right, which was kind of highlighted during Mike Levine's presentation on the irregular presence of 1 and 2 year olds, and thought that consistent with what the CIE recommended, we drop those surveys or those age groups from the survey. Next slide, please.
Okay, hang on. We have a question here still, I think, from Martin.
Yep. Thanks. Jim, are the CIE reviews posted somewhere that we can access them? We hear about them, but they're not given to the plan team, and they're not, it's not clear where we can find those. I mean, I know eventually they get posted, but it's kind of, it would be useful to see those, I think, at some point.
Yeah, great question. And I don't recall whether he referenced them. They are, every CIE review report is available online through the CIE organization, through the contractor for NOAA. So I don't have the link handy, but I can find it and send it later. And yeah, of course we have them locally, and I thought Cole referenced most of them, but Steve's posting them in the chat. I don't know if it gets out to everywhere, but yeah, they are available, and apologies for not bringing that up.
Yeah, thanks. And Curry has a question too.
Thanks, Jim. I was just looking for some clarification on the plan team recommendation to address the Q penalty. So my understanding was, previously there had been random walk parameterization for catchability for that Shelikoff survey. Now that there's this proportion mature covariate in there, maybe it's less necessary. So by dropping the Q penalty, is that sort of freeing up the random walk component to do whatever it wants to do? Or what do you mean by freeing or dropping the penalty? Is that dropping the random walk or dropping the penalty?
So when we inquired about this, Cole said that it has a very let's see, make sure I say this right, a very minor penalty, or sorry, it's not doing much. And so, the constraint is pretty much removed, and he seemed to think that removing it would not change the result. So basically it was no longer needed to help with fitting the trend. And it's basically replaced with the timing index. So that's, he said that it could be dropped and it wouldn't change the result. And so that we supported that.
Thanks, Jim. I guess I'm still a little unclear. It seems like, is it dropping the penalty on annual deviations in catchability such that it can freely vary now, or that it's going to be?
No, it's the other way. It's the other way. Sorry, it's the other way through the chair. Yeah, it's dropping it so that Q is constant, but a function of the timing. Sorry, is that clear?
Yeah, that's very helpful. That's sort of the direction I thought one would go, but I wanted to be sure. It was a little unclear in the plan 2 minutes and then in the document as well. I also wanted to double check. So that would be incorporated in this sort of new 23D. There would be time invariant catchability for that survey, correct?
Yes.
And
that's correct, except by the covariate. Yeah.
Yeah, but including the covariate. Was there any discussion of also bringing forward 23C, the one that doesn't include the Dirichlet multinomial as sort of an intermediate case, or was it generally accepted that that was a substantive improvement over the free weighting approach?
If I'm remembering it correctly, that one had sample size that was unacceptably low. It was basically ignoring all the composition data, which we work really hard for. We have a lot of agers reading those and people measuring fish, and then it was basically discarding it, and that didn't seem helpful.
Thanks, Jim.
Okay, a question from Dana too.
Yeah, thanks. Jim, I'm not sure if you remember this, but there's a figure in the document of doing bootstrap weighted ages. And I guess I don't totally understand if that's used, but there's a lot of wonky black lines. And I was just wondering if either you or Cole could comment on that.
Yeah, I mean, he was using my program to basically bootstrap, but included, I think, better estimates of the observation errors. So the figure that you're referring to, he used to support his decision on what final weights at age get used. What final weights at age get used in the assessment. So yeah, that's something that it becomes more important as you start to look at random effect changes and potential weights at age. But that just shows the sorry, let me back up. He has the random effects weighted age as an option, but he didn't have the uncertainty in the prediction of the weighted age, and that's what the black lines are. And the wonky ones will be where there's few sample size. And I don't know if Cole's on or he's been promoted. Did I get that right? If so.
Okay, so that's informing the random effects. It's not the data that's used in the model. Is that right?
That's my understanding. Yes.
Okay, thanks.
Okay, go ahead. I think we're good on questions.
Thanks. For Pacific Cod, I got the new assessment author from last year, just went through and scrubbed all the data, was able to basically start at first principles again and gleaned a number of things and tried a number of options. And then we all thought those were great, including the 5 centimeter, which I think you talked about a bit in the Bering Sea. I didn't follow that closely, but we recommended all of the changes, and along with the base for November. There were some minor comments on looking at aging error, which you've already talked about, I think, too. And then I had a comment on looking at the weighted age output from stock synthesis to compare with the empirical data, just kind of as a gut check, because they're all tied to the growth function that gets used. And then as far as Pete had a presentation on the apportionment, and he recommended status quo, and we agreed. And just on these PDFs, you can click on the links to get to the original presentations on the underlined heading. Sorry. Next slide, please. So thorny head rockfish, we got more discussion on the random effects models with different conventions. They did a lot of work looking at how to combine longline survey along with the bottom trawl and different process error specifications. And we recommended they bring forward their recommendation with a single process error and a base model for November. And then just to look at some of the additional observation error explorations that they were testing in this assessment. Next slide.
Okay, we have a question here, Sherry.
Hey, Jim. Just a couple questions on that second bullet. So the further evaluation of adding observation errors, were these the additional observation errors that are labeled in the table above, or were they additional observation errors?
Oh, good question. I'm not sure I know the answer.
Okay.
Phone a friend.
You're the chair.
I've got another one, so we can move on to that while, I guess the other question is the further evaluation, is that the further evaluation that's intended for December, or is that further evaluation that you're only going to look at bring forward model 24.2 and a base in December, or just 24.2 and no base? I guess that's a second question.
Great. Chris?
Yeah, through the chair. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, sort of.
Through the chair? Okay, thanks. I think I can clarify a little bit, Sherry, to your first question. Jane also presented some diagnostics that they've developed for REMA, and using this thorny head as an example, it came out that that there could be some additional looks into the whole REMA package and looking at how observation error is done. So this isn't just thorny head, but thorny head was used as the example. So Kevin plans to do that in the future. That's not for December. So the plan is to bring forward the base model from last year as well as model 24.2 with using what was outlined in his document.
Okay, thanks. That helps. I think we're good on questions here, so go ahead.
Thanks, slide advancer, whoever you are. Dusky and Northerns, we broke this out into apportionments because they were kind of team discussed, and they used the FAST approach for this in a new way. And as far as that seemed to be very useful. And here we talk about EGOA, Eastern Gulf, but the author and supported it was there's so few northern rockfish in the Eastern Gulf, and the survey data are so variable there. We really felt it was a good decision to just lop them off. There's 2 tons that get swapped in and out of the Eastern Gulf. But here again, we talked about looking at single shared process error for the apportionment. This is done by Ben and Kristen. Thanks. Next slide, please.
I think we have a couple questions on this one. Sherry and then Curry.
Sure. Thanks, Jim. So for using the VAST for the Dusky and Northern, I was able to listen to most of the discussion, and the VAST results were considerably different than the design results. And I know that the point was made that they're just different processes, and that I definitely understand. What I was wondering was there any look into why why with VAST, the Western and at least for Dusky, I believe it was Eastern, were so much more than the Gulf compared to the design base. I guess I'm just looking for sort of a gut check, which I know can sometimes be done. I'm wondering if you have any information on that.
Thanks for, you're talking about Duskies for the Eastern part? Because we dropped Northerns out of the Eastern altogether.
Yep, when I mentioned the Eastern, yep, it was just for it was just for Duskies.
Yeah. If I understand the question, the stability of the VAST approach seemed to be much better than what we get for design based. I guess you already said that point. Yeah, it just seemed like to the authors that it was a better approach altogether in the context of that, having a time series and being able to split them out. I don't know if Chris has more to add or anybody.
Yeah, go ahead, Chris, if you have anything to add.
Yeah, I was just gonna ask Sherry to repeat that question, please. I got a little confused in that.
Sure, no problem. With the VAST apportionment, the apportionment so makes sense that VAST is a consistent process to use that for apportionments like you're using it in the assessment. I did notice, and I think this came up in the plan team, was that the amount in the Gulf was actually smaller than pretty much any of the design-based observations in the time series, which again can be understandable since they're different processes. But I guess I was wondering, was there any look to why VAST may have been that much lower, which is just sort of a confirmation or a gut check that your analysis is actually giving you something that would be expected?
Yeah, I don't know if Ben or Kristen are on. I would have to defer to them. I know this was a pretty lengthy discussion last year or 2 years ago when we adopted it for use as the survey index. I don't think we had that discussion as a plan team this year. It was just trying to be consistent using VAST for apportionment as well as the index. And I know the shifts between like this Western to the Central and the design based is often these really spotty big toes are falling right on those lines and can go back and forth where the VAST smooths it out. But in terms of your question, I don't know the answer in terms of magnitude of VAST versus design based.
I see that Ben is online. If you have anything to add to that, go ahead.
Yeah, can you hear me all right?
Yes, we hear you just fine.
I can't recall directly for Duskies what that looked like. The impetus for this is that we've decided that the survey is acceptable for utilization in the stock assessment, and it seemed kind of odd to then be changing over to a different survey in order to use our apportionment when we changed out of that survey because we have poor we don't have much strong belief in that it's providing good data for the models. And then just some of that smoothing that you're going to see from VAST is, I believe, because I'm not an expert in VAST, is going to come just from the spatial correlation that it's going to implement within there that you're not going to gain from the design-based model.
Yeah, thanks. That helps. And we have a question from Curry.
Yeah, just a quick question. I'm guessing this is for Ben. So in terms of the specification of the VAST model used for apportionment, were you assuming autocorrelation in the intercepts or the spatiotemporal fields?
Through the chair, I'd have to go back and check. We are using the default gap model, but with the log normal error structure instead of the gamma error structure. So whatever their default is, but I haven't looked at that in a while.
Okay, thanks. I don't see any other questions, so Jim, go ahead.
Yeah, thanks. Kristen, reviewed the most recent assessment and noted that the previous assessment was using a normal error structure for survey data and changed that to the log normal error, which is more standard. And then she found that the age range, recruits at age 4 was excluding some of the early year classes. So that was a minor adjustment, and it affects the reference points B100 on the way tier 3 projections work. And so that was something that we saw as an improvement and recommended that going forward as the base, along with the base model. Next slide, please. So northern rockfish, the 12 survey biomass had the same issue with the log normal error structure. They revised the input sample size that incorporated both growth variability and aging error, the work of Ben Williams and Pete Hulson. Super handy for this. And we accepted these as basic improvements to the model. And then Ben has also eagerly gone ahead and converted the model into RTMB, which we saw as a huge improvement. And I learned today that even though we had some minor issue or noted some minor issues in the bridging aspect, I learned today that he was able to resolve those and is now getting exact matches for all of the models. So we thought those could be used in going forward to bridge between ADMB to RTMB, similar to what was done last year for Gulf pollock. I think that's all we have for northerns and Duskies. Next slide.
Okay, we have a question here from Sherry.
Hey, Jim, with your latest update of what the author has found, this, I guess what I was I'll ask my original question, and that was, it sounded like the team was willing, ready to move ahead with RTMB and didn't have any concerns, but yet there were enough concerns that you asked the author to evaluate small differences. And so I guess this sort of comes back to a previous conversation when we're talking about whether or not to bring back a base model. I guess I'm trying to understand why you were confident enough in RTMB to bring it back, but not confident enough that we needed to ask for further evaluation for December.
Well, I think we were convinced he was really close. It wasn't ready for prime time, and he's bringing both forward this year. And I don't think it matters which one you use as far as advice, because they'll give the same answer. I think it's more for the future beyond this December. Does that help? Hello?
I'm sorry, I must have missed the last. Can you repeat the last part of your question? We had different things going on here. So you said he was really close, not ready for prime time, and then what was the rest?
And from what I understand today, and what we kind of expected during the plan team, is that these were minor issues. They would be fixed by November, and bringing both of them forward is a great idea if you can show us that they match. It's not like we're changing models in November, they're identical. I think it's more for beyond November this year. Is that helpful?
I'm really sorry. There were two conversations here again. So let me ask you this. Are you planning to bring back only the RTMB model in this December, or are you also bringing back an ADMB model in December?
So I say the base model here, the second to the bottom bullet, is coming forward, and that is the ADMB model. The base model is ADMB model. M24A is the one that we're recommending. Well, sorry, technically, I guess there would be 3. There would be RTMB and M24A with a a different M and selectivity prior, and then the base model for M24, which they're all coming forward. So I think it's a moot point if they match between ADMB and RTMB. It's more a point for going forward in the future that we would say you don't have to bring forward any ADMB model in the future. Is that better?
I have people, yeah, I guess so it sounds like when you talk about the base model, is the base model in ADMB? Because in the paragraph in your slide, the fourth bullet, it suggests that it's RTMB. Are we on the same page there? I can let somebody else go.
Yeah.
There are a number of SSC members trying to give me messages. So can one of you, I can't read. Maybe Franz can pick on another SSC member and they can clarify their understanding with me.
I probably economized on words in this slide. I try to not clutter things too much. The ADMB model is coming forward. It was converted to RTMB. It's also coming forward. That's all.
Great. Can you tell me M24, the model that's coming forward, can you tell me just so that I know when I say this for our minutes, is that ADMB or RTMB?
Well, in this November, December, it won't matter, but it will be the ADMB. It'll be both. And the reason it's got a different name from M22 is that it's got updated modifications, the log normal error structure, the input sample sizes. Thanks.
Great, thanks.
I think we'll go ahead. If we need additional clarification later, we'll go for that. But anyway, I'll leave it at that. Or do you have any more insights, Curry?
Not really an insight. It's more a procedural question. And since we're on this topic, we were talking earlier about kind of standard practice moving forward with the plan team when a model gets converted from ADMB to RTMB or TMB. We obviously had the example from Gulf Pollock. I think the way we structured our minutes last October with respect to Gulf Pollock was that the plan team would have the discretion to review this sort of parallel implementation. And if they were satisfied, then only one would need to be moved forward. In this case, it seemed like there were some discrepancies, hence the plan team requesting that the original ADMB model be brought forward in addition to that TMB implementation. That seems like good practice to me. I just wanted to clarify if this is sort of the way that the plan team is planning on handling this sort of thing moving forward.
Yeah, go ahead, Sherry. I mean, that wasn't entirely clear whether they're going to both be available for comparison in November, but I understand they will be. Sherry.
Okay, so I agree with everything that Curry said. You bet. If there are any discrepancies, bring both forth in December. That would be fantastic. So I am on board. I don't, however, know when I look at this, when I look at the slides so that I know what to say and we know what to put in our minutes. The team recommended moving forward with RTMB and model 24.A, which is RTMB with estimated M and selectivity priors, and the base model, M24, which I think is the RTMB model. And so I don't see anything because the ADMB models, as far as I understand, are M22-1A and M22-1B. And so if ADMB and RTMB are coming back in December, I guess what I want to know is what is the ADMB model that's coming forward? I know that Jim said that it doesn't matter, and I didn't quite understand
No,
why.
it's M24. I'm really sorry. I'm being so unclear. M24 is in ADMB. At the plan team, we requested that come forward. If RTMB matches perfectly, great. Then that will be also coming forward and used in the future. I'm sorry, I'm being so unclear.
Oh, that did it. Thank you very much.
Thanks. I think we're good to go to the next stock then.
Thanks. We had a CIE review on a surplus production model for yellow eye that Phil Joy undertook, and he's actually advanced that quite a bit. on the side with one of the CIE reviewers, and he presented that. It was very informational and interesting. You all know he changed jobs, so he will be not available to do this, but he's still keenly interested, and we appreciated that. And then there was some update on DSR authorship changes and the extent of future ROV surveys. And the team recommended that ADF&G get yellow eye lengths from the IPHC so that there's pretty limited data from the state, and the Southeast stations in the Southeast will be useful to get, even though we understand that IPHC doesn't presently measure fish other than halibut unless a special project request. Next slide, if there's no questions.
We got a question from Jason here.
Yeah, thanks, Jim. Just a quick clarification, because I was a little confused when I was listening to the plan team. The ROV survey, which is somewhat foundational to this assessment, is it going away, or is there anticipation that that's going to be back once they get the ROV configured properly?
Thanks through the chair, Jason. My understanding is that it wasn't coming back, but I looked at Chris or Sarah to see if they remember.
Yeah, through the chair, I can try to answer that. My impression was they were giving us the update that they had bought some new ROV equipment and it was not satisfactory to do the work they hoped to. And they'd also lost someone to retirement and was sunsetting their old ROV. So I don't think there's any plans to continue that survey at this time. And with the authorship transfer, they're bringing forward the model that they presented 2 years ago. And so they'll be sticking with that. And I think we'll be looking forward to hearing what the state plans to do in terms of data streams and surveys in the future.
Thanks.
Thanks, Chris.
I think we're good on questions here, so go ahead.
Yeah, so we got a great presentation by a new hire at the Alaska Center. Oh, sorry, by Calais, who is a recent hire in our group. Although I just tease her about that all the time. But seriously, we had another application using Seattle for Arrowtooth, which there's been some bridging between those two, and we're very encouraged by that. And we look forward to seeing that in 2025. Next slide.
We got a question here, Cherry.
Hey, Jim, I was just wondering yeah, I saw the presentation and the documentation on this, which looks great. I was curious, so for the other ones that we're seeing, if there was bridging in September, we were seeing it in December. But this one, the recommendation was to bring it back in September of next year. And so I guess I had two questions, and I'm guessing maybe this was just a timing thing. But do I understand correctly? This was for September 2025, and if so, I guess why the timing? Just because it's different than other models that we're seeing now.
Thanks.
Let me clarify. If we're accepting this change now, why are we recommending that it come back in September of 2025?
So it's a research track model, and I think there's and Chris, I'm lean on you here. Arrowtooth was a harvest projection, or was it something else for this year? So the standard. And so,
yeah,
go ahead.
Oh, sorry, I didn't mean to jump on you there, Jim. Thanks. Through the chair, Sherry, yes. The scheduled full/update assessment for Gulf Arrowtooth is 2025. This year it's scheduled to be a harvest projection. However, the authors brought this research track model forward, one, to get approval to go to RTMB, and then also to have the discussion on mortality and cannibalism and how to deal with that. So they've got some information now to move forward for their full model in 2025, and we'll bring it forward in September of next year.
And just
Great.
to be clear, Chris said RTMB. This is an actual full-blown TMB, and it's the same model that he used in his dissertation, and it has some flexibility that we're looking to take advantage of. Thanks. Sorry for the interruption.
Great. Thank you.
Question from Martin.
Yeah, thanks, Jim. So what you're talking about here, I believe, is grants the single species. I mean, he can run it in multi-species or single species mode, and what you're proposing to do is just use the single species formulation of grants multi-species model for next year's assessment. Is that the idea?
It's a great question. That's what I originally thought it was, and because I know the origins of this model quite well. And yes, the short answer is yes, except that he only had one species in this multi-species model. And so what does that allow him to do? He can add in cannibalism. And so, and that's all at this current configuration. Obviously, he could pull all the other species back in, but the model is very flexibly set up right now so that he's been able to bridge a number of our assessments just by doing that, by running single species mode without cannibalism, and gives you the same answer as our single species ADMB model. And then, and of course, with the multi-species aspect, he can at one level just turn on cannibalism. That's the multi-species model with one species in it, which is what this was. And then he can also obviously add any number of species in, and as long as he just needs the prey preference type stuff. Thanks.
Thanks for that. I think that's it on questions. So go ahead.
So I'm going to turn this over to Chris because he loves talking about harvest projections. And I hope you enjoyed my voice. I might not come back.
Yeah, thanks, Jim. Jim's not in his office, so we appreciate him getting on to help us out here. I know there was quite a bit of discussion in the Bering Sea Aleutians harvest projections, so I'm not going to say much, but I can try to answer questions. All the OFLs and ABCs are in the documents. There were no red flags. The team did have a pretty extensive discussion on the extrapolating catches. I've got a few comments and statements I can speak to if the SSC would like to hear that. And one thing that we did hear from a member of the public, which is different in the Gulf and the Bering Sea Aleutian Islands, was to have authors address apportionment in the documents and in the slides, because the Gulf has different apportionment management regions that are of interest. So we made that recommendation moving forward for next year. And I guess I can take questions or comments in terms of harvest projections and extrapolating catches and whatever else people have on their minds.
Yeah, thanks, Chris. I'll actually ask a question on the catch projection. So I think there were some cases where you really just have a very short time series because the fishery starts really late in the season, so you have a very little catch available. So is that just something that you're planning on kind of monitoring as we go through several cycles of doing this in September to see if those projections are reasonable, or what's your thinking there?
Yeah, thanks. Through the chair, the box has been opened. I'll respond. Yeah, so we do the harvest projections for efficiency. We've been doing them for like 10 to 15 years as partials. To my knowledge, we've never had any like regrets, concerns, lawsuits, overfishing by how we run those projection models. So moving the catch extrapolation up to August does present the possibility for some additional error compared to doing it in October. Authors were directed to take a look at it. And just as a reminder, the SSC has weighed in on this for partials at least 10 years ago or more, and made a statement to try to at least document and standardize. And as the discussion earlier today was, there's not much standardization because each fishery is different. So I think you kind of got to do it on a one-off. And what I think a recommendation would be for all the authors to really take a look and respond on their next partial or next assessment. How off were they? Because I think what you see is there's a lot of deviation in how these extrapolations occur. And when they're not too close, they find a better way and work it in there. And things change every year. So I think it's hard to get in that standardized mentality on this. I think if the author or the review bodies have a major concern, they can always go to max ABC, which would be the most conservative way to do this. We have in-season management that keeps catches in line with tax or ABCs. So there's a lot of different things moving there for stocks that are on these harvest projection cycles of projection models that are generally lightly exploited and below ABCs. So we could put a lot more effort into it. And I also want to add in that from a couple authors that I talked to, the harvest projection model is quite robust to the catch estimates you put in there. So as long as you're not really wrong on that August catch estimate, we think we're in a pretty safe mode in terms of what we're trying to put into these assessments.
Thanks, Chris. That helps. Jason has a question.
Yeah, Chris, did the plan team discuss like what would be a red flag out of these projections? I'm just having a hard time sort of imagining a situation where we'd see a large enough shift that we'd need to react, especially on a 2-year cycle assessment.
Yeah, through the chair, I agree absolutely, Jason. We went through the prioritization exercise to put them on 2 or 4-year cycles. I don't think we've seen anything in the past that would concern us running that projection model. Part of the idea is to help realize some fishing opportunity there by using, if there's lower catch, it may increase ABC for this year. But we're talking about minor changes. We're talking about stocks that we don't have a major concern over from a year-to-year basis. And, the whole idea was to make these more efficient, do them in September, October, so the review bodies can focus on full model reviews. So I would agree with what you just said, and I don't know of any red flags.
Great, thanks. Chris has a question too.
Yeah, thanks, Chris. I think you said that the projection model outputs are pretty robust to changes in catch, i.e. they're not going to move that much or change that much. So isn't that contrary to a concern that the methodology of how you estimate catch matters a whole heck of a lot? Thanks.
Sure, through the chair, I think we've beat this horse pretty good. So yes, I think that's a valid statement. Like I said before, we could just go to max ABC, but the idea of estimating catch as best we could was to give it our best guess as it would crank through the projection model. And in terms of being robust, I think we're not going to double ABC here. We're moving it by a couple tons. So it's not a major concern when you really step back and take a look at it.
Thanks. That helps. Not seeing any other questions here. I think we can move along, whatever's next.
Sure. So we put this slide up because we did get a presentation by Dr. Lyle Britt, who's the race division director, in regards to the 2025 summer acoustics survey. And essentially he informed us that they're planning to discontinue the biennial MACE acoustics trawl survey. We did this after the pollock presentation. It primarily affects pollock. I'm not going to go into any details. I believe Dr. Foy is going to cover this when he discusses it with the council. In regards to what the plan teams talked about, we put a few things in there, which I think one thing is dropping that survey. It is used in pollock apportionment. The author's well aware of that. I think there'll have to be some work to address how to continue the apportionment strategy for Gulf pollock. And another thing that was brought up was that this survey was looked at for use in the Pacific Ocean perch model and was discussed pretty extensively at the last POP CIE review. And the general consensus coming out of that was that it wasn't useful to include that survey in the POP assessment as a separate index. So losing that survey, those are two of the topics that came up. I would say that the plan team had some thoughts and discussion on. Otherwise, I know there was a lot of internal analyses and behind the scenes looking at that I'll defer to Dr. Foy on, that he can respond to the council. But if there's any questions about what the plan team talked about, I'd be happy to try and answer something.
Thanks. I don't see any questions on this, so go ahead.
Great. And I'm going to punt this over to Sarah, who I believe is still at the table with you, and she can address the stock structure spatial management discussions.
Thanks, Chris. Through the chair, this is Sarah Cleaver, council staff. I'm still at the table, Chris. So the council last year requested a discussion paper on stock structure and spatial management for 4 of the Gulf rockfish stocks, and this is being presented to the APN council at this meeting, but for you all, it's an informational only item at this time, so we're not asking for an in-depth review of this. But the plan team did receive a short presentation on this and provided some feedback in your minutes. The main goal of the paper from the council was to both provide some information, or the most updated information that we have on the stock structure status for short-raker, thorny heads, rough-eye black-spotted, and other rockfish, and then to look a little bit at the management or fishery implications resulting from any alternative spatial apportionments of ABC. And the council noted in that motion that is, if there are no conservation concerns, what combination of subareas for those stocks are necessary to reduce or avoid fishery management implications. And so the plan team's feedback on that mainly centered around how limited the data are for these stocks, and that based on all that data, it's challenging to make conclusions about spatial stock structure. There's limited data that suggests a lack of genetic stock structure for some of these stocks, and the plan team also discussed that they weren't totally clear on how to what the team's role would be when it comes to impacts related to socioeconomics of the fisheries due to these apportionment schemes. Yeah, so I will leave it at that, since that's an info only item for the SSC at this time, but we just wanted to provide you, be transparent that you might see this again in some form, but it's not on your agenda as a separate item right now.
Thanks, Sarah. Any questions on that, Jason?
Yeah, just a quick question. There was a question in your slide deck to the plan team regarding sort of the assessment author's role in apportionment. And I guess I'm supposing that that'll come out of this, maybe this council discussion, some clarity on that, or is that something that maybe the SSC needs to be thinking about? I'm just trying to understand how best to that context.
Through the chair. So when I brought this to the plan team, I think the slide that Jason's referring to, I asked for both feedback on the conclusions that the paper made on stock structure status, and then whether the plan team saw any biological reasons to divert from the status quo, or biological reasons for the current apportionment or the subarea groupings, and then any additional considerations or information as this goes through the SSC council. So I'm not sure specifically in terms of assessment authors what the question is, but in terms of kind of looking at it both from an author, plan team, and SSC perspective, I think the plan team's questions about its role with that socioeconomic information and potential impacts to fisheries might kind of bleed across some of the discussions that the SSC has been having even earlier this morning.
Thanks. I think that's it for questions on that. So I think we have a couple items left.
Yes, so just finishing up here, these are the Gulf halibut DMRs provided by the working group. So the plan team recommended these as the proposed DMRs for 2025 and 2026. And then we have a couple slides which are just our proposed harvest specifications, which are a rollover of what you saw last year for 2025. And we did have a virtual meeting this year, so we're looking forward to being back in person together in November. And then this was just for your reference in case you wanted to see what might be coming in November.
Thanks. So you're referring to this as what's coming in November, but we're not seeing harvest projections again, right?
Through the chair, correct. So this is just for this whole year, 2024, and then down in the third row, you see that we're reviewing those in September. So this is all the golf assessments for this year and what stock assessment product is being provided.
Yeah, thanks. Curry has a question.
Yeah, you noted you met virtually for the September planting meeting. Is that the plan moving forward for future September meetings, or is the hope to go back to in person?
Through the chair, thanks for that question, Curry. So our understanding right now is that once in every 4 meetings, the plan teams are going to have to meet virtually. And I think this is mainly just due to a funding issue. And so the plan teams decided that it would be more valuable for them to be in person in November. And so whichever year it is, the virtual meeting would probably be the September planting meeting. So we'll keep everyone updated on if there are changes to that. But next year we should have 2 in-person meetings for September and November.
Thank you.
Okay, thanks. Any other questions for the plan team coordinators here? Not seeing any. Nobody signed up for public testimony. There was no, I just refreshed. So there's no written testimony on this. So I think we're ready to go into our discussions. So we'll start with the Polygon card stock, and that's again Curry, Dana, and Fabio. And I'll turn it over to Curry, and you can either stop after each one or do them together, however you wish.
Yeah, I think we'll stop after each one if that's all right with everyone. So in terms of Gulf Alaska Pollock, underwent a CIE review in May 2024, and I think we should highlight our appreciation to the author for their efforts to explore and address the recommendations that came out of that review. The author basically structured a series of models, 23A through 23D, that dealt with specific recommendations, things like updating the survey index CVs and input age composition, sample sizes to better reflect interannual variation. We talked a lot about sort of incorporation of this formal link between winter Shelikoff survey catchability and the proportion mature. As I said, this, directly incorporating this link really fills in what I think that time varying catchability was meant to capture in the past. And I appreciated the clarification from the plan team chair that their actual recommendation, which I don't think was very clear in the document or in the plan team minutes about what was actually intended. But I think after some discussion, the formal recommendation in that context from the plan team was when this link with proportion mature was included, there would no longer be time varying catchability for this survey. So I'm choosing to interpret it that way after some discussion, but others can correct me if I'm misinterpreting this.
Well, actually, that could be misinterpreted. There is time varying variability, but it's directly linked to maturity and no additional variability.
Yes, there is no longer random walk Q within the model in addition to the linkage. There we go. The other major substantive change was, of course, the removal of these age 1 and age 2 indices from the Shelikoff survey. I think it was ample evidence presented that this survey is not intended to capture those individuals. And in fact, they have an outsized impact on estimates of recruitment, leading to very low estimates of recruitment in recent years after 2015. Final change being a shift from Francis reweighting of the age compositions to use of a Dirichlet multinomial likelihood. I think that, the authors did a really good job of clearly demonstrating some of the improvements and comparing sort of model estimates for spawning biomass as well as other quantities, and also highlighting how, in particular, this change, I believe, that's represented in 23C led to better convergence for some key parameters that were difficult to estimate based on trace plots and so on and so forth. So in general, I think the SSC should support the groundfish plan team recommendation for the status quo model number 23, as well as model 23D that includes, these updated index CVs and input age comp sample sizes, this link with proportion mature, as well as the removal of the age 1 and age 2 indices and the replacement of Francis reweighting with the Dirichlet multinomial likelihood. However, sort of contrary to the recommendation from the plan team, given the sort of rather substantive change that occurs when you go from model 23C to 23D, when you change the approach to reweighting the age composition data in terms of the overall biomass, spawning biomass. I think I would also like to see the author bring forward model 23C in November as an alternative. I'm interested to hear discussion on that point. I think the SSC can also support future research to identify ways to quantify uncertainty in the proportion of mature individuals from that survey, given this new linkage between catchability and the proportion mature. And the first thing that comes to mind is bootstrapping hulls, or given that this is an acoustic trawl survey and there aren't that many hulls that are catching or used to determine mature, immature resampling amongst individuals within hulls to get an estimate of uncertainty that might be used.
Okay, thank you, Dana.
Yeah, thanks, Curry, for the great summary, and thank the authors again for more good work. I think I just want to hit a couple points that he said was the analysis showing that dropping the age 1 and 2 I thought was appropriate given the unreasonably low recruitments that those kept influencing recent recruitment estimates. I also thought the author's inclusion of the spawn timing and Shelikoff covariate was a really useful using external data from an ecosystem survey instead of the random walk was a good thing. Would like to see a little bit more description of how that bootstrap weighted age is done in the November document. And as far as Curry's recommendation on 23.C, I think if you're intending it to be just a way to better understand the different compositional weightings, I think that'd be reasonable. That's it. Thanks.
Thank you. And then Fabio.
First, I want to thank the authors for the work, and I agree with my colleagues' comments and also support Curry in terms of bringing the 23C as well. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Other comments, Chris?
Yeah, just to add it to this assessment, I'm on the winter survey stuff. It'd be great if there was a comment in there about the couple of areas that weren't surveyed in the winter survey and how that does or does not influence the assessment at all. It'd be just nice to have a statement in there that they acknowledge that happened and if there was any influence on that. Thanks.
Okay, other comments on this? Not seeing any. Actually going to just very briefly state that we'll generally support the the recommendations from the plan team and appreciate the improvements that have been made in response to CIE comments, and the only difference, I suppose, is that we recommend also bringing forward Model 23 C in November for comparison, and I'll leave it at that. So next is PCOT.
Yeah, for Gulf Pacific cod, As usual, I think we can thank the authors for their diligent efforts to explore some sort of necessary updates to the input data for the assessment and really streamlining and standardizing the data import process from ACFIN. I think this is a good step forward towards consistency and reproducibility. A couple things I'll note, right? There's no new survey data for 2024 for the stock, so we're only getting new fishery catch and length composition data. There were several model variants explored or described here. The sort of 2019.1C series, there were kind of 7 nested explorations within there. And these I would categorize as really sort of housekeeping, right? There was a correction to the approach for calculating a log normal standard deviation, correcting the months that are implied for particular data types. Correctly inputting the input sample size in terms of the number of hulls, given some removals. And I think probably most critically, although as demonstrated, not having an impact on assessment results, changing the definition for the plus group from 116 centimeters to 104. But in general, I think the documentation generally showed that there were kind of modest changes in model estimates resulting from these sort of housekeeping changes that were put in place. 2019 1D had some updates to aging error parameters, and interestingly, pooling reader tester data from across the Eastern Bering Sea and Gulf of Alaska regions to increase sample size. I mean, I defer to others who maybe have a better understanding of any reason we shouldn't do this, but first brush, it seems like a reasonable approach to try to increase the number of reader tester observations. And then generally speaking, there were the other substantive change was in model 2019.1E that addresses some increasing variability in fishery length compositions, basically removing a filter for hulls that had very few observations and merging both state and federal data in the same way that the catch data is done for the catch data already. And then the final 2 explorations looked as was done in Eastern Bering Sea Pequod at the effect of moving from 1 centimeter to 2 and 5 centimeter length bins. I asked Steve in the Eastern Bering Sea case, and I'm guessing the answer is the same for the Gulf of Alaska as to why originally there were 1 centimeter length bins, and it didn't seem like there was a real strong justification. So I think we can move forward and endorse those. So I think overall I'd support the author and groundfish plan team recommendations for the author to bring forward the status quo model 2019.1B for November, as well as a model incorporating all these sort of housekeeping updates and other updates, mostly changes to input data, and moving to those 5 centimeter length bins. So that would be 2019.1E 5 cm. There was some brief discussion about explorations looking at different ways to approach apportionment, specifically including AFSC longline data in addition to bottom trawl survey data. Seems like there's still some work to be done, particularly trying to incorporate the temperature linkage that's used in the assessment within the REMA model for incorporation of longline survey data. And so I think in general, we can support continued research in that direction, but the sort of plan team recommendation to go with the status quo apportionment strategy based on the bottom trawl survey for this year.
Thanks for the overview, Dana.
Yeah, thanks, Curry. I agree with most of that, and I think most of this is pretty straightforward. But I guess I made the comment during Bering Sea that I think the 5 centimeter bins might be a little coarse around important parts of the growth trajectory and selectivity. So just want to make sure that's explored to see if it has any real effect. Other than that, yeah, I don't have anything else to add. Thanks.
And Fabio, oh, sorry, Curry, did you have a clarification or addition on that?
Yeah, I wonder if I might just clarify, Dana. So in terms, are we encouraging future research to continue exploring the impact of that, or are we asking for a model with a finer length bin structure to be brought forward, that 2 centimeter version?
I think we will see that anyway, right? Because we'll have the base model with the 1 centimeters, and but maybe just some explorations to ensure us and make us comfortable that there's no impact. Doesn't have to be a model choice, I guess, if there is no impact.
I think we can cast that as something we'd like to see. Thanks.
Okay, thanks, Fabio.
I just agree with my colleagues' comments. I think we're fine with that. Thank you.
Thank you. Other comments on PCOT? Not seeing any. I'm just going to let that stand since Curry just gave the full summary, and we are generally agreeing with all the plan team recommendations and with the models to bring forward, whose names I didn't catch anyway because they're too long. Yeah, appreciate all the explorations and including the sort of housekeeping corrections. And then the only thing I'll flag is issue that it would be good to still at least have some ability to evaluate the change from 1 to 5 centimeters, maybe if appropriate, explore that some more, and because in some regions of the size range that might be a bit coarse. And with that, I think we can move to the other proposed models for other stocks, and Sherry will kick us off.
Thanks. Like the previous leads, I think want to thank both the authors and the plan team for the work that they've done this year, and really appreciate. I know we had in our general comments from last year a request to clarify what models are being brought forward in December, and the authors and plan team worked really hard to do that, and we appreciate the steps and the changes that were made to make that clear. The other thing I wanted to note is that in the presentation, I really appreciated the summary slide at the very beginning that had all the different stocks, if there were changes, and what assessment type. There were a few differences early on in like author presentations, PT report, and even some that changed during the plan team meeting, or one that changed during the plan team meeting. And that was an awesome, helpful slide for us to see where things ended up after the plan team. As far as model runs for Thorny Head, for Dusky, and for Northern, I'd like to just support the plan team's recommendation for models to be brought forward in December for those. For Dusky and Northern, there were also the plan team recommended bringing forward only the vast apportionments to match what the stock assessments were using as far as methodology for those surveys. And I would suggest that the SSC supports moving to VAST for these. And I think that my initial thought, other people can see if they agree, but is that we can support that change now to bring forward only the VAST in December like the plan team suggested. There were a couple of things. I think that there was going to be some further work for Dusky in the Eastern Gulf on how to apportion that, and that'll be great to see support that extra conversation that'll happen in November. Just make sure I'm not missing anything. Great. So those were for the model runs that are coming forward. There were a couple of other models. So that was for Thorny Head, Dusky, Northern. Those are my recommendations for those. I think we can do these all together. So the next one was the GOA demersal shelf rockfish CIE response and the model. And I think that, we can say that the SSC appreciates the update on the CAE review of the DSR research model, which is the Bayesian surplus production model, and the work that's done on the previous assessment author in response to that CAE review. The SSC appreciates the efforts of this previous assessment author and supports the continued exploration of this research model for SAO YOI as time allows. And I think we should also note that in similar to the plan team, we recognize that a large amount of work would be needed to implement the surplus production model. They talked about an MSE that would be necessary ahead of time. So it's sort of I think we can support this as practicable for future exploration by the department. As far as the DSR update, we appreciate the update on the DSR surveys and authorship for this year. We share the disappointment in what appears to be the end of the ROV survey. And I think we can support ADF&G obtaining DSR data from IPHC survey as practicable and as possible for those two agencies. The last one was the research update for arrowtooth flounder, and I think that the SSC, I recommend that we support the plan team recommendation that the TMV version of this single species model be used in 2025. So this is accepting the plan team's sort of approval of that TMB version to come forward without another base model I think it was in ADMB before. Yeah, it was in ADMB before, without that in the future, so that the authors can focus on TMB. Those are my recommendations.
Thanks, Sherry. Brett's next.
Thanks, Ron. It's a great summary, Sherry. I concur with all of those recommendations. Just to have a couple minor things to add. If I understood the minutes and what Jim said, I think in regards to Thorny Head, that the REMA team was actually going to begin to work on building capacity within that tool to address observation and process errors more explicitly, which I think sounds great. So there'll be benefits beyond just that particular assessment, and that'll be a capacity that other authors can use. So I think the SSC should just note that we appreciate that. As it regards northerns and duskies, some of that conversation I think will be, we'll have some additional clarity once the council weighs in on the spatial management policy. It may influence decisions that are before us as it regards moving to spatial tools like VAST, but in particular here, the approach to duskies in the Eastern Gulf would probably benefit from getting a sense of where the council wants to go with the spatial management policy. So hopefully in the future, we'll have some insights depending on what they have to say in this cycle. And then just to reiterate the importance of having yellow eye data of some sort in the Gulf from that ROV survey. It's, it is really disappointing, but I guess from my perspective, see something viable in the offing. And so I think it's great to sort of point at maybe IPHC or other sources, but to put a marker down in our minutes that really indicates this is going to be a major gap going forward.
Thanks, Brad. And then Jason.
I don't have anything to add. Agree with what my colleagues say. And just want to mention the DSR survey, and it's just another case where we've lost some information.
Thanks, Sherry.
So I guess, yeah, to clarify, to go back to what Brad was saying, I do think, accepting using VAST for apportionment, this is very similar to the issue that we ran into last year with black spotted, where we were going to change and use two indices instead of just one. And the SSC postponed doing that because we heard that there were issues for the fishery and we wanted input from the council. So we postponed that. So now this came up again, we're being more consistent with our stock assessment. And I've heard some anecdotal conversations that this may limit fishery sectors in the Central Gulf, but we didn't hear any public testimony. We haven't heard anything clear or formal about that. And so without that, I suggested going forward with the science as is best. And I recognize that what the council is going to talk about at this meeting may impact that. I don't know if they would come back to us. I have no idea what would happen, but I just fell back on the science since I haven't heard anything else. But yes, this is exactly the issue that's coming in front of the council. So I just wanted the SSC, other people that hadn't looked at this, to realize that, yeah, we actually are making a decision based on science that may be limiting because of different methodology.
Thanks for that addition. I think we should at least point that out that, Curry, go ahead.
Yeah, my comments also on the apportionment example for Dusky and Northern. So, I mean, right now, as presented, there are vast indices that are by region that are used for apportionment, but there are ways to incorporate autocorrelation within the structure of a vast model. And we've explored this before back in 2017. So you can assume either a random walk or an AR1 process for the intercepts as well as the spatiotemporal fields. And I think that should be better described or at least explored. I mean, it seems like an option that's a middle ground that doesn't require you to fix your apportionment over multiple years in the Gulf. It would be kind of a middle ground between the apportionment strategy that I think is being put forward and the REMA model approach. And I didn't see that explored here, and I'm kind of wondering why not. I think that could be a request moving forward. I'm not sure I want to sort of say that you shouldn't move forward with this apportionment strategy, but we should have a clear recommendation that various aspects of the REMA model in terms of smoothing across time and the vast model-based approach to index standardization can be brought together within the same framework and encourage the authors to do so.
Thanks. I mean, I think that's a good sensible recommendation. That, we don't know where we're going to end up in terms of potentially substantial changes in the apportionments and whether that might have any impacts. But I mean, I guess that's we can't do anything about that until we get some clarity on the spatial management policy and whether there are concerns about that. But go ahead, Sherry.
Yeah, I guess my question is whether I saw two ways forward with this. One, to make the one that seemed to make sense just based on consistency as far as doing VAST, but I don't know the intricacies of VAST like you do. And so the first thought was to move ahead with this. The other way would be to ask to see, I know that at least one of the authors, I think it was in reference to this, said it wouldn't be a big lift to bring back REMA. Now that's different than running a different apportionment. But I guess the other way we could do this is we could ask for it in December so that we can make the decision after the council has talked about this. I was hesitant to bring more work for the authors and for the review body, so I didn't know if it was worth it. But your suggestion that there may be something intermediate, I don't know, makes me wonder. So I'd be interested in your thought, Curry.
Yeah, I mean, what I would like to see is a direct comparison of basically the apportionment method using VAST as proposed, plus an implementation with a VAST model that assumes basically an AR1 process for the intercepts as well as the spatiotemporal fields. It's going to serve to smooth things out even more than they are already smoothed. But I think it is, given our overall objectives, probably a good thing to see in December.
So just to clarify, then you're suggesting a REMA, the approach that has been used, the REMA-based approach, the VAST approach that they are proposing, plus a VAST approach that includes temporal autocorrelation. Sherry?
The only addition that I would say to that then is recognizing that this is an additional piece, not only to bring back both, but to run it in a different way. I think our fallback then is to use the design. So say as practicable for the authors. And if they can bring back all three, great. If not, we can default to what has currently been used and just delay it for another year. In other words, I don't want to put the authors in a pickle, not knowing their timing. But that could be another way to do it. Say this is something that we would like to see before we change the apportionment. And if the authors can bring it forward in December, great. And if not, then we would go back with a default of what we're currently using.
Okay, thanks. I think we're, Jason, go ahead.
I think having more options is probably going to be good for December, but I guess the question is there some biological rationale why we'd pick one of these over another, which kind of brings me back to this discussion paper and, you know, sort of this trap that we get into each year. So I think in the interest of maybe bringing forward a new method that might provide some smoothing, some other options, that makes sense to me, but I'm sort of back at the foundational question about the apportionment. So I'm not suggesting anything additional. I'm just kind of noting that the council weighing in on this is important. I don't want necessarily to say that we don't need that. I think that's really important with this.
And just for my understanding and clarity, for these particular stocks, like we've said for the other stocks that we sort of dealt with last year, that there were no conservation concerns, so we kind of held off on changes to the apportionment. For these particular stocks, there are not conservation concerns either in terms of the area apportionment. Is that correct? Does maybe
That was my understanding from listening to the groundfish plan team, because the discussion there was that for them, you know, how you do apportionment, my recollection was that how you do apportionment didn't necessarily matter for the plan team, and I'm assuming that meant because there wasn't a underlying biological concern. But I'd be interested if anybody else remembers. I can see Sarah thinking too, and I know that you wrote the other paper, and Thorny Heads was one of them. And I think on that one, short raker was the only concern, right?
Through the chair. So rough-eye black spotted, I think earlier you mentioned rough-eye black spotted last year. The issue the SSC had was with short raker, and rough-eye black spotted is the stock that there is data that suggests that there is some spatial structuring of the population. I think as far as determining conservation concerns, it's likely a different discussion when you're talking about which method the author should use for apportionment versus whether or not you can have sub-area apportionments or not.
Well, we do have separate apportionments for these stocks right now.
And my understanding was that using either one of these approaches, I didn't think were a conservation concern. That didn't seem to come into the discussion. But
yeah, I mean, for now, we can make our recommendations based on the best approach, really, and we made some recommendations along those lines. If we run into trouble with that later, we can address it as needed. Dana?
Yeah, I was just going to point out that rationale we've often used for these apportionment methods is that when you have a pretty low F on these things, you can kind of mess around and go back and forth across areas, and you're probably not going to have a big problem.
Okay, other issues on the GOA, other proposed models. Okay, I'll just briefly summarize our notes, and we'll thank the authors and planning team for their efforts on this, and appreciate the summary slide in the beginning as a kind of a roadmap for the model runs. We generally support the plan team recommendations for models to bring forward. We had some comments on the vast apportionments for Dusky and Northern. And we may request some clarity on that in terms of the transition from REMA to the vast-based apportionment that's proposed here, and maybe ask for an additional alternative vast-based apportionment that includes autocorrelation, and to bring those three forward as practicable in December. I'll just note on the GOA DSR CIE, we appreciate the updates on that and the responsiveness to CIE recommendations to develop the surplus production model and support continued exploration of that as time and resources allow. We got an update on the DSR survey, and might express our concern over the end of that survey. Another one that bites the dust, and highlight the importance of data on yellowfish in particular, I think is what Brad had highlighted. And then on the ATF research model, we support the CPD recommendations for the single species TMB version in 2025. And that's kind of what I had for high level summary. That brings us to the last set of topics on any comments on the surveys, or we do need to comment on harvest projections, the proposed specs, and how about DMRs and any other topics. So Jason, if you want to start us off.
Sure. So I think one of the topics was the winter pollock survey. I think I can be brief. Just note that we received a report on that. Note the missed areas due to weather conditions. And then also note that there's a survey scheduled in 2025, and there's some details about where that survey is going to be. On the summer survey changes, so the acoustic survey, due to resources, there's discussion there about canceling that survey. And the presentation gave a good highlight of sort of the pros and cons about losing that survey, and principally a pollock assessment survey. I think the SSC, we should have note that we appreciate that report and just the thoroughness that they went through in terms of evaluating that. In this case, the vessel time, I think, would likely remain in the GOA, but there's no guarantee of that. But it could be reallocated to strengthen the winter acoustic survey and support other research projects in the GOA. So I think we should definitely note that losing surveys is a large concern. And then I would also like to add that I think keeping those vessel days in the GOA for research and winter pollock probably should remain a priority. I'd be curious what others thought of that. I know that's probably AFSC's prerogative to prioritize, but it just seems like losing that information out of the GOA could be a problem. The rockfish discussion paper, we didn't receive a full report, but I just want to note that the paper did a really good job of laying out the apportionment and management allocations, how they overlay these apportionments, including species that have been put on PSC status, and just generally the differences between the ABC of the OFL versus subarea ABC apportionments. And I just think the paper did a great job summarizing that, as well as just the current knowledge on the stock structure. So I just want to make sure that our minutes acknowledge that. Harvest projections. I'm going to be really curious to see what the rest of the group feels about this. First off, I think we should concur with the groundfish plan team recommendations and apportionments for this 2024 cycle. But I think thinking forward, I'd like to propose that staff and the groundfish plan team consider a change in the harvest projections, largely in an effort to reduce workload. So my proposal is this. For stocks on 2-year cycles, I'm thinking perhaps we don't need to do a harvest projection. The changes are generally small. There isn't substantial new information within that 2-year cycle that seems to me would cause a change in the ABC. And I also note the current year and next year's catch is also projected and the prior year's catch is finalized. So we're still working off somewhat of projected catch when we're looking at those harvest projections. So I would propose considering catch monitoring updates in the SAFE for those stocks on those 2-year cycles in lieu of the harvest projections. So basically updating the catch. I think there'd be some probably additional work staff would need to be considered in terms of the specification process. I think the situation though might be different for 4-year assessment cycle stocks. Those are primary flatfish. It seems like we could consider a harvest projection done midway through that cycle. And maybe the survey results could also be included along with that projection because we'd have new survey information. So that might be a little bit more useful in terms of judging stock trends. And certainly, I mean, the authors should have input, and if there are reasons for doing, harvest projections on the 2-year cycle, certainly that should be considered. Looking through my notes, make sure I didn't miss any other topics. Did I get them all, Franz?
We have to comment on the proposed groundfish specifications. I have the boilerplate language now. I can cover that if you want.
Yeah, that'd be
to
great. Yeah, whatever that boilerplate. I didn't have the language.
I'll just do that in my summary that we support the or recommend approval of the proposed specifications for 25-26.
Yep, I concur. That's what I got.
Okay. And then we have Chris on that.
Yeah, thanks. Just a couple of comments. One on the survey stuff, and this is really, as we've been talking about surveys and some losses and changes in surveys, I wonder if it's worth us or someone starting to track changes in surveys over time. I worry about if we have a reduction in a survey this year and we have a reduction in survey next year, did someone calculate the reduction from that previous year or the original sample size? And I think about, is there some consistent metric of here's the overall sample size of our survey, here's what it is now, and then making sure that there's a spatial extent of where those changes are, just so we as a group have an understanding of where those changes are over time. I feel like this is the road we're going over the next handful of years, and it would be super nice to know that, we haven't lost 50% of a survey in non-randomized design somewhere, and we're not tracking those things. So anyway, just a comment in there kind of to think about how we document survey changes over time, I think would be helpful from that standpoint. And that it's from the winter survey, but I think it's applicable to all of these things, that it'd be good to know that we're tracking some of this stuff. That's all. On the other comments I have are on the harvest projections. I agree with Jason. I think the 2-year projections could just go to catch reports. The reality of it, the magnitude of a change in catch in that first part of the season would have to be so dramatic. And that the change in the projection, which I don't think is actually really possible, for us to actually implement some change in an ABC just warrants moving this to, recommending that the staff think about moving this to catch reporting. Similarly, for the 4 years, they could do catch reporting for those other years other than halfway through. I think that would be totally reasonable we are just going to move forward and suggest that those things are okay. I also think on generally for the harvest projections, a non-prescriptive kind of general recommendation is to ensure that the presentations from the authors and the plan teams are that they have a couple of consistent metrics so we can look at them quickly and say, yeah, there's no concern here, or yes, there might be a concern, whether that's, how much the catch in August or September, whenever they pull it, has changed from the last 5 years of catch at that time period, right? Or how different a survey result is this current year from the last couple of years if there's survey results in that current year. I think a couple of those things would go a long way, along with an active comment from the author, whether yes, there's a concern or no, there is not a concern. Just having those pieces will make our job simpler, and just saying, yes, we agree with these OFLs and ABCs, or we want to try to do something or not. I think those are my general comments for that. Thanks.
Yeah, thanks. And maybe I'm not sure of how we might structure that, but we had like some similar comments in the BSAI, and maybe we can do that in a combined section for harvest projections in general, have some comments on that. We'll think about that. Other comments, DMRs, we also need to recommend or support the GOA plan team recommendation to approve halibut DMRs. Anything else? Okay, just briefly summarizing that last bit then. We, note we appreciate the updates on the surveys, and I'll just highlight here. We'll have some comments in the report. I'll just highlight here that we'll note concerns over the potential canceling of the Simacoustic survey for pollock. We appreciate the discussion around that and evaluating the pros and cons of that. If it is canceled, the SSC would highlight the importance of keeping that survey effort in the Gulf of Alaska, which is already relatively poorly sampled. We appreciate the update on the spatial apportionment and also commend the authors on the paper itself, which lays out the issues very clearly. Then with respect to harvest projections, the SSC concurs with the GOA groundfish plan team, and author recommended ABC and OFL for the 8 stocks with harvest projections for 2025 and 2026 with no reductions from max ABC, I think, for any of them. Is that correct? Okay. Jason, can you clarify then?
Yeah, it was rough eye black spot. It had a reduction due to model concerns last time we reviewed the model. So that reduction is basically carried forward through these harvest specifications.
Okay, thank you for that clarification. So we'll note the couple of reductions from max ABC. Then going forward, we I didn't hear any concerns about Jason's recommendations for the, I guess that's for the plan team to discuss and consider changes in the harvest projections, perhaps for stocks that are on a 2-year cycle. We don't need to do harvest projections, and we could consider catch monitoring in the SAFE instead. And then for 4-year stocks, perhaps consider harvest projections halfway through and catch monitoring or catch reports, whatever we call them now, otherwise. And then we had some suggestions on the things to include in the harvest projections in terms of the catch relative to previous years, and we had some comments in the BSAI on the that issue that we may pull out in a separate section on harvest projections. And then the SSC recommends approval of the proposed 25-26 GOA groundfish specifications as provided in the report. And the SSC supports GOA groundfish plan team's recommendation to approve the halibut DMR working group recommendations for proposed halibut DMRs for 25-26, I think. And then just one general comment. I'm not sure where that best goes from Chris on, the that somebody might consider or should be tasked with tracking all the changes in various surveys. And I guess that also kind of interfaces with the survey modernization overall for some of the surveys. But I think in general, that's a good idea to have some clear understanding of the changes over time in surveys and survey effort. And then did you have any additions, Sherry?
Yeah, and maybe Diana, Sarah, or Bob can help with this, but I think that the stock assessment prioritization, if we're going to move from a harvest spec, recommend saying that we would support moving from a harvest projection to a catch report, I think that that's an agency issue, not plan team. Okay. So I think that that's up to agency discretion, but we can certainly suggest thinking about it.
Yeah, I think in the wording we can clarify that and just say that we encourage the agency to consider that when those are kind of re-evaluated. Jason.
Yeah, I agree. I guess I'd want to make sure the plan team was going to weigh in if there was they were uncomfortable with just going to a catch report. I don't think they would be, but if there was, it would be good to hear that sooner than later.
We'll note the shaking of heads. No concern. Dana.
Yeah, I guess I just wanted to make sure, like, if everyone agrees with this, I think we should actually make it a little bit more of a recommendation than just consider, because I'm not sure what the center or the plan team would do with that. Like, there's no timeline with consider. And I think most of this stuff developed because we as an SSC said we wanted it. So if we don't want it, maybe we should say so, because we were worried during prioritization that we were not going to track these stocks. So just saying, if maybe we should make it stronger if we're going to put it in the minutes or not put it in the minutes.
Yeah, I have no issues about making a sort of a recommendation to the agency, I suppose. I don't know. I didn't want to be more specific about it because I don't know on what time frame these are reevaluated in terms of what goes where, but I assume somebody looks at it sort of annually, and we can just recommend that we think this would be sufficient for getting a handle on those particular stocks. Jason, do you have anything to add to that?
I think a recommendation is fine. I just think we want to be clear that, the agency needs to think about how to implement this if they were going to move forward. I just want to leave room for folks to have time to think about it to make sure.
So is that, good? Are we good with that on that specific recommendation? Sherry?
So I think that during the prioritization process, we talked about the interval at which it would be reconsidered, which I think was like 5 years, but I'm pulling that way from the back of my brain. So if anybody knows that it's different. And so I think it sounds like from what you were saying, Jason, really consider this, that we would be saying we think it's sufficient to be considered at the next review in 5, in the next review. Okay. Great. And if people think that it needs to be done or suggest it be done sooner, then we can certainly talk about that. Okay.
Okay, thanks. Curry, go ahead.
Yeah, just so I'm clear, we're recommending that they consider at the next review cycle doing away with the harvest projection category altogether. No. Okay. I'm glad I clarified.
Sorry, no, we are, if that wasn't clear, I think Jason made a proposal to just for stocks that are on a 2-year cycle to not do those harvest projections, but instead catch monitoring, or stocks that are on a 4-year cycle consider or we recommend a harvest projection halfway through the cycle and otherwise catch reporting, if I understood the suggestion correctly. And other stocks would remain on harvest, would still have harvest projections.
Yeah, I would just note that we just finished the 5-year review, so this is definitely a recommendation for far away from now.
Yeah, Sherry, go ahead.
We haven't necessarily had the chats on because that hasn't been a way we've done this in this meeting. And so, but I just have it, Melissa said, we left future prioritization as a topic to be revisited as needed. So my 5-year thing, ignore that.
Yeah, I mean, we'll word it as a recommendation and hope that something happens. Otherwise, we'll point it out in the future. So I think that concludes the Goa plan team items. So thank you to Diana and Sarah for walking us through that. It's 4:45 right now. Is Mike and Sarah, are you still available to at least start us off and see how far we get on the crew? Do we need a quick break? Okay, I sense we do. So let's try to limit it to like a bathroom break. I was under the impression that the presentation was relatively short, so but we can find a break point if needed. Are we okay to go till 5:30? So I'm hearing some concerns here. Let's just stand down for 5 minutes and we'll figure it out and see if we can at least get us started a little bit. I'll talk to the analysts. Thank you. Okay, we're back just for a sec. Just to note that because of time constraints of some of the leads and because of the time of day and because we went long yesterday, we decided that it doesn't make sense to even start on this now. So we will start with the item on, I always forget the title, crew shares something. Crew data collection, C5 crew data collection, tomorrow morning at 8 a.m. and we'll try to work through that as efficiently as possible. It may mean that we'll go into the afternoon a little bit for the remainder of the items. So that I guess closes the meeting for today.